What if Izuku was dragged into RWBY verse as Grimm King and formed breeding harem with RWBY, Weiss, Salem and all Huntress girls? Chapter 1, Emergence. The fist connected with All for One's face and cracked the mask clean in half. Izuku felt every bone in his right hand shatter on impact. Didn't matter. He was already swinging with his left, full cowling at 100%, green lightning tearing the air apart around him. All for One caught the second punch, of course he did, the bastard always adapted, and fired back with a combined quirk blast that sent Izuku skidding across the shattered rooftop. You fight like him, All for One said, touching the exposed flesh where his mask had been. Like Toshinori. All desperation and sentiment. Izuku spat blood. Yeah, well. He taught me everything I know. And look where it got him. Izuku launched forward again. Not because he had a plan. Not because he saw an opening. Because if he stopped moving, he'd think about All Might lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away, breathing through a machine, and if he thought about that right now he'd break. Their fists met in the center of the rooftop and the world screamed. Not a sound. Not an explosion. The actual fabric of reality just screamed. Izuku felt it in his teeth, in his bones, in the part of his brain where One for All lived. Something tore. Something opened. A crack appeared in the air between them, and it wasn't a crack in concrete or steel. It was a crack in everything. What? All for One started. The crack widened into a hole, and the hole became a mouth, and the mouth swallowed. Izuku grabbed for the edge of the rooftop. His fingers found concrete, held for half a second, then the pull ripped him free. All for One was already gone, sucked into the void, his scream dopplering away into nothing. Izuku followed, tumbling through absolute darkness, One for All flickering and dying in his veins like a candle in a hurricane. He fell for what felt like hours. He fell for what felt like seconds. He hit liquid. Not water. Thicker than water. Warmer than water. It moved against his skin with intention, pressing into his mouth and nose and eyes even as he thrashed to the surface. The stuff was black, pure, impossible black, and it burned. Not like fire. Like acid mixed with electricity mixed with something that had no name in any language he knew. Izuku screamed underwater. The black liquid poured down his throat. His quirk died. One for All, the power passed down through 9 generations, the accumulated strength of humanity's greatest heroes, it just went out. Like someone had flipped a switch. Izuku felt the vestiges scream, felt Nana and Banjo and All Might and every other holder ripped away from him, their connections severed, their voices silenced. And in the void they left behind, something else moved in. It was cold. It was vast. It was hungry. Izuku's back arched. His body convulsed. The black liquid wasn't just burning him anymore, it was rewriting him. He could feel his cells splitting and reforming, his bones cracking and regrowing harder, his muscles tearing and knitting back together in configurations that weren't quite human. His skin paled. His veins darkened. Something grew along his forearms and shoulders, hard, white, bone-like plating that erupted through skin and receded and erupted again, as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. He dragged himself out of the pool on hands and knees, vomiting black liquid onto dark stone. His fingers dug grooves into rock that should have been too hard to scratch. When he finally stopped retching and opened his eyes, he could see in the dark. Not vaguely. Perfectly. Every crack in the stone, every ripple in the pool behind him, the faint bioluminescent glow of crystals embedded in a cavern ceiling 100 feet overhead. And he could feel them. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. Things in the darkness, surrounding him, watching him. He knew what they were without knowing how he knew. The word surfaced in a mind that was still reorganizing itself. Grimm. They were everywhere. Packed into the cavern, pressed against walls, lurking in tunnels that branched off in every direction. Beowulfs, the word came unbidden, like he'd always known it, crouched in ranks. RWBY hunched in the shadows. Creeps skittered across the ceiling. A deathstalker the size of a bus sat motionless in the far corner, its golden stinger reflecting the crystal light. Every single one of them was staring at him. Every single one of them was absolutely still. Izuku's breath came in ragged gasps. His analytical mind, the part that never shut off, the part that drove his classmates crazy with muttering, was already cataloging. Unknown location. Unknown creatures. Powers gone. Body altered. Hostile environment. No allies. No communication. No idea how to get home. He was so screwed. One of the Beowulfs took a step forward. Then another. It approached him slowly, head low, and Izuku's new instinct screamed at him to, what? Fight? Run? No. Something else. Something that felt natural in a way that terrified him. Command it. Izuku raised a hand, palm out, and thought, stop. The Beowulf stopped. It didn't just stop walking. It stopped existing as a threat. The aggression drained out of its body, its red eyes dimming from violent crimson to a dull, almost peaceful glow. It lowered itself to the ground and pressed its skull against the stone. Behind it, every Grimm in the cavern did the same. The sound of hundreds of massive creatures simultaneously kneeling echoed through the cave system. It went on, spreading outward, because Izuku could feel it now, the signal, the command, the authority radiating out of him in waves. Not just this cavern. The tunnels beyond. The surface above. Miles in every direction. Every Grimm that felt his presence responded the same way. Okay, Izuku said to nobody. His voice cracked. Okay. That's happening. He sat down heavily on the stone, surrounded by a kneeling army of monsters, and tried very hard not to have a panic attack. It didn't work. He had the panic attack. Full-on hyperventilation, hands shaking, vision tunneling. The Grimm around him shifted uncomfortably, they could feel his distress, he realized, and it was confusing them. Their king was afraid, and they didn't know what to do about it because the thing he was afraid of was himself. Izuku forced himself through it the way Recovery Girl had taught him after his first real battle. Breathing exercises. Count the seconds. Focus on something concrete. Concrete. Right. He looked at his hands. Still his hands, mostly. The skin was paler, not white, but noticeably lighter than his usual complexion. Dark veins were visible at his wrists and forearms, tracing patterns that looked deliberate, almost organic. When he focused, white bone-like armor materialized over his knuckles, dense, smooth, warm to the touch. When he relaxed, it dissolved back into his skin. Okay, he said again. Analyze. That's what I do. I analyze. He stood up. The Beowulf nearest him raised its head, watching. You, Izuku said, pointing at it. Sit up. It sat up. Lie down. It lay down. Roll over. It rolled over. 2 tons of Grimm predator, rolling over like a dog. Izuku would have laughed if the situation weren't so insane. He turned to the Ursa. You. Come here. It came. Standing in front of him, it was enormous, 12 feet tall on its hind legs, bone plating across its face and shoulders, claws that could shred steel. And it was looking at him with those red eyes like a puppy waiting for instructions. Izuku reached up and touched its snout. The bone armor was rough under his fingers. He could feel the Grimm's essence, dark, simple, driven by basic impulses. Hunt. Destroy. Feed on fear. But underneath that, something more fundamental. A connection to the black pools. A connection to him. He focused on the Ursa and thought, smaller. The Ursa shuddered. Its body compressed, bones cracking and reforming, mass redistributing. In seconds, the 12-foot monster had shrunk to the size of a large dog. Same bone plating. Same red eyes. But compact. Almost cute, in a horrifying way. Holy crap, Izuku whispered. He could reshape them. He could redesign them. The analytical part of his brain went into overdrive. He spent the next hour. 2 hours. Hard to tell underground, experimenting. He made Beowulfs faster by streamlining their bone armor. He made creeps sturdier by thickening their plating. He created a Grimm from scratch, pulling dark essence from the pool and shaping it with his will into something small and birdlike that perched on his shoulder and chirped. The chirping Grimm bird was oddly comforting. I need to get out of here, he told it. I need to find people. Figure out where I am. Figure out how to, he stopped. How to what? Get home. He didn't even know what had happened. The rift, the fall, the pool. Was he even in his own world anymore? The creatures around him didn't exist in any record he'd ever seen. The architecture of this cavern, massive, ancient, deliberately carved, didn't match anything from his Earth. The Grimm bird chirped again. Right, Izuku said. One step at a time. Step 1, surface. He walked. The Grimm parted before him, and he felt their attention tracking him through the tunnels. He didn't need to see, he could sense the layout through the Grimm themselves, each one acting as a node in a network that mapped the entire underground system. The tunnel system was vast, stretching for miles in every direction, centered on the pools of black liquid that Izuku was already thinking of as the source. When he finally emerged into open air, the sky stopped him cold. 2 moons. One of them was shattered, broken into pieces that hung in the sky like they'd forgotten how to fall. The other was intact, smaller, tucked behind the first. Stars he didn't recognize filled a sky that was the wrong shade of dark blue. Izuku stared up at the broken moon for a long time. Different world, he said quietly. I'm in a different world. The Grimm bird on his shoulder chirped. Yeah. I know. The landscape around him was desolate. Dark stone, sparse vegetation, a sky tinged with purple near the horizon. But in the distance, far, maybe 20 miles, he could see the green of a forest. And beyond that, the faint glow of lights. Settlement. People. Izuku started walking. He'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when he realized the Grimm were following him. Not the whole army, he'd unconsciously told most of them to stay put, but a dozen Beowulfs, the miniaturized Ursa, and a pack of creeps had fallen into formation behind him. An entourage. No, he said, turning around. Stay. I can't walk into a town with you guys behind me. The Beowulfs whined. Actually whined, like scolded puppies. I mean it. Go back to the caves. He paused. Could he call them? He reached out with his senses, feeling the connection. It was like a thread tied to each of them, stretching but never breaking. I'll call you if I need you. Stay. They stayed. Reluctantly. The Grimm bird refused to leave his shoulder. He let it stay, it was small enough to hide under his shirt collar if needed. He hoped. The walk took hours. Izuku used the time to take stock of himself. His body was different, stronger, faster, more durable. He could feel it in every step. The ground that should have been rough under his bare feet, his shoes hadn't survived the transformation, felt like smooth tile. When he accidentally stepped on a sharp rock, the rock broke before his skin did. His senses were amplified. He could smell water from miles away, hear insects he couldn't see, track the movement of small animals through undergrowth by the vibrations in the ground. And always, the awareness of Grimm. They were everywhere in this world, he could feel them in the forest ahead, scattered through the wilderness, drawn toward negative emotion like moths to flame. That was interesting. He could feel the pull himself, a faint tug toward something in the distance that radiated fear. Not his fear. Someone else's. Izuku started running. The forest swallowed him in seconds. He was moving faster than he'd ever moved with full cowling, dodging between trees by instinct, the Grimm bird flattened against his neck and chirping in alarm. The source of fear was getting closer. Multiple sources. A cluster of negative emotions, fear, pain, desperation, surrounded by a ring of Grimm signatures that were not his. Wild Grimm. Uncontrolled. And they were hunting. He burst through the tree-line into a clearing and processed the scene in a fraction of a second. A girl, young, his age maybe, surrounded by Grimm. Beowulfs, 8 of them, circling. She was fighting. She had a weapon that was simultaneously a scythe and a rifle, and she was good, spinning, shooting, cutting through Grimm with practiced efficiency. But she was tired. He could see it in the slight lag of her movements, the way her left foot dragged between swings. She'd been fighting for a while, and they kept coming. 3 more Beowulfs emerged from the trees behind her. She didn't see them. Izuku raised his hand and pushed. The command hit every Grimm in the clearing simultaneously. Not a verbal order. Not a thought. A pulse of absolute authority that resonated through the dark essence that made up their beings. Every Beowulf froze mid-stride. The ones about to pounce on the girl locked up in the air and crashed to the ground, rigid. The girl spun, scythe raised, looking for the new threat. Her eyes found Izuku. Silver eyes. That was the first thing he noticed. Not just gray, actual silver, bright and striking, and they were doing something weird. Flickering. Pulsing with a faint white light that built in intensity the longer she looked at him. It hit him like a punch to the chest. Not pain, exactly. More like resonance. The Grimm essence inside him vibrated at a frequency that matched the light in her eyes, and for a second the two forces met, and instead of canceling each other out, they harmonized. The dark veins on his arms glowed, then faded. The light in her eyes flared, then dimmed. Both of them staggered. "What?" she started. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, because that was always his first question, in any world, in any body. She stared at him. Her weapon was still raised, the scythe blade angled toward his throat. Smart. Behind her, the frozen Grimm stood motionless, their red eyes dim, their aggression completely nullified. "Did you just?" She looked at the Grimm. Back at him. At the Grimm again. "Did you just make them stop?" "Yeah. I think so. I'm still figuring out the specifics. People can't do that. I'm getting that impression." She took a step back, scythe shifting to a defensive position. He didn't blame her. He probably looked terrifying, shirtless, his shirt hadn't survived either, pale skin marked with dark veins, bone-white armor fragments still visible on his shoulders and forearms. A Grimm bird perched on his shoulder like a familiar. "What are you?" she asked. Not hostile. Genuinely curious, with an edge of wariness that he respected. "That's a great question. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm not from around here." "No kidding." Izuku dismissed the Grimm. All of them, simultaneously, sent them scattering into the forest with a mental command. The clearing emptied in seconds, leaving just the two of them standing in the aftermath. Fallen leaves settled. The girl lowered her weapon by inches. "I'm RWBY," she said. RWBY rose. "And I have, like, a million questions." "Same. Can you start with the basics? Like, what planet is this?" RWBY blinked. Remnant. Remnant. Okay. And he gestured vaguely at the sky, though it was daylight and the moons weren't visible. "Broken moon thing?" It's always been like that. Right. Different world. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. He was muttering. He could feel himself doing it and couldn't stop. So Remnant, Broken Moon, creatures of darkness called Grimm based on the word she used, scythe rifle indicating advanced weapon technology possibly integrated with some kind of personal enhancement given the way she moved, silver eyes exhibiting unusual luminescence possibly linked to, "Are you okay?" Izuku snapped out of it. RWBY was staring at him with a mix of fascination and concern. "Sorry. I do that. When I'm processing." "You mutter." "Yeah. That's kinda adorable." Izuku felt his face heat up, which was bizarre because he was fairly certain his biology had been fundamentally restructured. Apparently blushing survived interdimensional transformation. RWBY collapsed her weapon, the scythe folded into a compact rectangle that she slung across her back, and took a proper look at him. Her silver eyes did the flickering thing again, but softer this time. Less aggressive. Like they were adjusting to his presence rather than reacting to it. "You're not Grimm," she said slowly. "But you're not Grimm. You're something else. That's the most accurate description anyone's given me so far, and you're the first person I've talked to. Where are you from?" "You said different world." "I think so. I was fighting someone, a villain, a really bad guy, and there was some kind of rift. I fell through. Woke up in a pool of black stuff underground. Now I can do the Grimm thing." RWBY's expression shifted. The wariness was still there, but underneath it, Izuku could see something he recognized from years of watching heroes: compassion. The instinct to help someone who was lost and scared, even if they were scary themselves. "That sounds terrible," she said simply. "It wasn't great. Are you hurt?" Izuku looked down at himself. He honestly didn't know. His body felt fine, better than fine, actually, better than it ever had. But fine in a way that was deeply wrong. "I don't think so. But I don't really know what I am anymore." RWBY nodded, like that made perfect sense. "Okay. Well. You saved me from those Beowulfs, so you're not evil." "Probably. You want to come with me?" "I was heading back to the main road before the Grimm jumped me. There's a town about 5 miles that way. You trust me? You just watched me command a clearing full of Grimm." RWBY shrugged. "You asked if I was okay. Bad guys don't usually lead with that." Izuku laughed. He couldn't help it. The first genuine laugh since he'd woken up in a pool of nightmare fuel, and it came from a girl with a giant scythe and the most straightforward moral compass he'd encountered since All Might. "Lead the way," he said. They walked. And Izuku asked questions. So many questions. RWBY, to her credit, answered every single one without getting annoyed. She explained Grimm, creatures of darkness, drawn to negative emotion, no souls, existing only to destroy. She explained aura, the manifestation of the soul, a protective shield that also powered semblances, unique abilities tied to individual identity. She explained huntsmen and huntresses, warriors trained to fight Grimm and protect civilization. "And you're a huntress?" Izuku asked. "In training. I go to Beacon Academy. Well, I'm supposed to be going back tomorrow." This was a solo training exercise. In Grimm-infested wilderness. Alone. RWBY had the decency to look slightly sheepish. "I might have gone a little further out than I was supposed to." "How much further?" "Like, 40 miles further." Izuku stared at her. She grinned, and it was infectious, bright and unashamed and completely unrepentant. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Me? You remind me of me. That's concerning." They reached the edge of the forest. Below them, a valley spread out, green fields, a winding road, and a small town nestled against a river. Izuku could see buildings, people, vehicles that looked like a mix of modern and fantasy tech. And he could feel the Grimm in the area, scattered, wild, keeping their distance from the settlement. They shied away from him as he approached, his authority rippling outward. "Whoa," RWBY said, watching a pack of beowulfs at the valley's edge literally turn around and flee. "They're running from you. I think I'm broadcasting something. They don't want to be near me unless I want them to be. That's actually amazing. Do you know what huntsmen would give for that ability? We spend our whole lives fighting these things, and you just," she made a shooing gesture. "It doesn't feel amazing. It feels like wearing someone else's skin." RWBY's expression softened. "Hey. You'll figure it out. That's what heroes do, right? Figure stuff out. How'd you know I'm a hero? Because you ran toward the screaming instead of away from it. Kinda the definition." Izuku didn't have a response to that. They descended into the valley. The town was called Milbrook. Small, maybe 2,000 people, with a wall around its perimeter and guard towers at each corner. RWBY walked through the front gate with a wave to the guards, who clearly knew her. "Hey RWBY, back early? Thought you were out till tomorrow," and Izuku followed, keeping his head down. It didn't work. People stared. Of course they stared. He was shirtless, barefoot, marked with dark veins, and had a small Grimm bird sitting on his shoulder that kept chirping at passers-by. "We should get you clothes," RWBY said, eyeing him. "And probably hide the bird. His name is Chip. You named the Grimm. He chirps. Chip. It works." RWBY covered her mouth to hide a smile. "You're so weird. They found a clothing store." RWBY paid. Izuku didn't have whatever currency Remnant used, which turned out to be called lean. He ended up in dark cargo pants, boots, and a fitted black long-sleeve shirt that covered most of his dark veins. Chip went inside the shirt collar and settled against his neck, radiating a faint warmth that was oddly comforting. They were eating at a small restaurant. Izuku was starving, apparently interdimensional body horror worked up an appetite, when the bandits hit. Not Grimm. People. A group of 12, armed with bladed weapons and what looked like repurposed military rifles, kicking in the front gate and firing shots into the air. Standard intimidation tactics, same as any world. Izuku had seen this before, villains targeting small communities that couldn't defend themselves. RWBY reached for her weapon. Izuku put his hand on her arm. "Let me," he said. "I need to understand what I can do." He walked out of the restaurant and into the main street. The bandits were already herding people toward the center of town, shouting threats. Their leader, big guy, scarred, carrying a sword that glowed faintly with what Izuku guessed was dust, spotted him immediately. "Get in line, kid," or, Izuku closed the distance in a single step. Not a leap. Not a sprint. Just, one moment he was 30 feet away, the next he was inside the leader's guard, and his fist was connecting with the man's jaw. The bone armor materialized over his knuckles on impact, adding density and hardness to a punch that was already superhuman. The bandit leader flew. Literally flew, lifting off the ground and sailing backward into the town wall, cracking the stone on impact. He slumped down, unconscious. The other 11 bandits opened fire. Bullets hit Izuku's chest and arms. He felt them, the impacts registered, like someone poking him firmly. The bullets flattened against his skin and fell to the ground. One hit him in the forehead. It bounced off with a ping. "Huh," Izuku said, looking down at the deformed bullets at his feet. "That's useful." He moved through the remaining bandits in under 6 seconds. No wasted motion, no excessive force, each one got exactly enough to put them down. A palm strike here, a grab and throw there, an arm lock that ended with a controlled takedown. His body moved with a fluid precision that was different from his old fighting style. Less brute force, more predatory efficiency. Like his combat instincts had been rewritten along with everything else. When it was over, 11 bandits were on the ground groaning and one was embedded in a wall. The townspeople stared. RWBY, standing in the restaurant doorway, stared. "Okay," RWBY said. "That was hot, cool. That was cool. Super cool." Her face turned red. Izuku pretended not to notice. "Are there authorities I should hand these guys over to? I'll call the local huntsman office." RWBY pulled out a device, a scroll, she called it, essentially a smartphone, and made the call while Izuku zip-tied the bandits with their own supplies. While they waited, Izuku noticed something. The townspeople weren't just staring at him with fear or suspicion. Some of them were looking at him with something else. Gratitude, sure. But also a kind of awe that made him uncomfortable. He'd gotten that look from people in his world after he'd inherited One for All, and it always felt wrong. Like they were seeing the power instead of the person. RWBY was different. She looked at him and saw a weird muttering kid who named his shoulder bird and asked too many questions. He liked that. The local huntsman, a grizzled old guy named Marcus, showed up an hour later, took custody of the bandits, and gave Izuku a long, measuring look. "You're the one who put these guys down?" "Yes, sir." "You registered?" "Registered? As a huntsman? Licensed fighter?" "No. I'm not from around here." Marcus grunted. "Obviously. Well, you've got skill. If you're looking for direction, Beacon Academy's accepting applicants. Tell Ozpin that Marcus from Milbrook sent you." He paused. "And kid? Get that bird checked out. It looks wrong." Chip chirped indignantly from inside Izuku's collar. RWBY was practically vibrating with excitement as they left town. "You should totally come to Beacon. I can introduce you to my team, and my sister Yang, and Professor Ozpin. He's the headmaster. He's kind of mysterious but in a cool way, and we have combat classes and strategy courses and, RWBY. Yeah. What happens when they find out about the Grimm thing?" She stopped walking. The excitement dimmed, replaced by something more considered. Yeah. That might be complicated. I can control Grimm. I have Grimm essence in my body. I'm walking into a school that trains people to kill Grimm. You see the problem. But you're not Grimm. You're a person. A good person. You've known me for 4 hours. I'm a really good judge of character. Based on what metric? Based on my gut. Izuku sighed. But the truth was, he didn't have better options. He was in an unfamiliar world with no resources, no connections, and a body full of darkness that he didn't fully understand. If there was a place where he could learn more about Grimm, about Aura, about this world's systems and rules, a Huntsman Academy was probably it. "Okay," he said. "Let's go to Beacon." "Yes." RWBY pumped her fist. "This is gonna be awesome. It's going to be a disaster. Awesomely disastrous." They hitched a ride to Vale on a cargo transport. RWBY knew the driver, because RWBY apparently knew everyone, and Izuku got his first look at a major city on Remnant. Vale was massive, sprawling, a mix of architecture that reminded him of both modern Tokyo and something out of a European fantasy. Airships cruised overhead. The technology was advanced but different, dust-powered rather than electric, integrated with a cultural infrastructure built around the constant threat of Grimm. The whole time, Izuku could feel the Grimm in the surrounding wilderness. Hundreds of them, pressing against the borders of civilization, held at bay by walls and weapons and the constant vigilance of huntsmen. And they could feel him. Every Grimm within range oriented toward him, a compass pointing at its north. Some tried to approach the city, drawn by his presence. He pushed them back with a thought, reinforcing the stay-away command. Nobody in Vale noticed. Nobody felt the invisible war he was fighting to keep his presence from disrupting the ecosystem. Nobody except RWBY, who watched him concentrate and quietly put her hand on his arm. "You okay?" "Managing. There are a lot of them." "The Grimm?" They want to come to me. I'm keeping them back. Her silver eyes flickered. That must be exhausting. It's getting easier. I think I'm calibrating. Beacon Academy sat on a cliff overlooking Vale, a castle of green and white stone connected to the city by an aerial tramway. RWBY led him to the base of the cliff, badged them through security with her student ID, and they rode the tram up in silence. Izuku spent the ride staring at the academy grounds, watching students in combat gear walking between buildings, sparring on practice fields, lounging under trees with textbooks. It looked like UA. It looked so much like UA that his chest hurt. You miss your home, RWBY said softly. Yeah. We'll figure out how to get you back. You don't even know where I'm from. Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. That's what heroes do. She grinned. Now you're getting it. Professor Ozpin's office was at the top of the tallest tower, accessible by an elevator that climbed for an uncomfortably long time. RWBY chattered nervously the whole way up, filling the silence with trivia about the school, her team, her favorite weapons, all of them, apparently, she loved all weapons equally. The doors opened. Ozpin was waiting. He was tall, silver-haired, younger-looking than Izuku expected for a headmaster. He sat behind a desk covered in scattered papers and coffee mugs, a cane leaning against his chair, and he watched Izuku step out of the elevator with eyes that saw entirely too much. RWBY, Ozpin said pleasantly. I believe your solo training exercise was confined to the southeastern quadrant. This is not the southeastern quadrant. I got a little lost. 40 miles lost, according to your tracking data. RWBY winced. There were extenuating circumstances. I can see that. Ozpin's gaze settled on Izuku. Calm. Analytical. And underneath the calm, something that Izuku's new instincts read as deep, old, weary wariness. This man had seen things. Many things, over what felt like an impossibly long time. Please, sit down. Both of you. They sat. Izuku felt Chip shift under his collar and mentally told the bird to stay hidden. I assume, Ozpin said, pouring coffee from a seemingly bottomless pot, that you're the reason every Grimm sensor on our perimeter went haywire approximately 4 hours ago. Probably. And the reason the Grimm in the Emerald Forest have been unusually docile since this morning. Definitely. Ozpin sipped his coffee. Interesting. Would you care to explain what you are, Mr. Midoriya? Izuku Midoriya. And honestly, Professor, I'm still figuring that out. Izuku gave him the basics. Different world. Dimensional rift. The pools. The transformation. He left out specifics about One for All. Instinct told him to keep that card close, but he was honest about his abilities. Grimm control. Grimm creation. Physical enhancement. The bone armor. Ozpin listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change. But Izuku watched his hands. They tightened on the coffee mug when Izuku mentioned the pools, and they tightened again when he described commanding the Grimm to kneel. This man knew more than he was letting on. Way more. You mentioned pools of dark liquid, Ozpin said carefully. Where exactly did you emerge? Underground. Cavern system. I didn't have a GPS. Could you find it again? I could feel my way back. The pools are connected to me. I can sense them from here. Ozpin set down his mug. For the first time, something cracked in his composure. Not fear, recognition. He was looking at Izuku like he was seeing something he'd been dreading for a very long time. Those pools, Ozpin said quietly, are where all Grimm originate. They are the remnants of the god of darkness's power, left behind when the gods abandoned Remnant. No human has ever survived contact with them. I'm getting the impression I'm not entirely human anymore. No. I suspect you're not. But I'm not a Grimm either. I have a soul. I can feel it, Ozpin studied him. You're certain? Izuku held up his hand. Concentrated. After a moment, a faint green glow surrounded his fingers, not the lightning of One for All, but something similar. Aura. His body had one, and it was active, and it coexisted with the Grimm essence in a way that should have been impossible. Grimm don't have aura, RWBY said, leaning forward. They can't. It's the whole thing, they're soulless. This is unprecedented, Ozpin admitted. A being with both aura and Grimm essence. The implications are scary. Izuku offered. Profound. They talked for another hour. Ozpin probed carefully, testing Izuku's knowledge, his intentions, his moral framework. Izuku recognized the technique. All Might had done something similar when deciding whether to pass on One for All. The difference was that All Might had been open and warm about it. Ozpin was layered, guarded, every question designed to reveal something while giving away nothing. Izuku got tired of it. You're testing me, he said flatly. You've been testing me since I walked in. You're trying to figure out if I'm a threat or an asset, and you're not going to tell me which conclusion you've reached because you want to keep your options open. That's smart. But I want you to know that I can tell. Ozpin's eyebrows rose. Beside Izuku, RWBY looked between them nervously. I'm not going to pretend I'm harmless, Izuku continued. I'm obviously not. But I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because I fell through a hole in reality and I'm trying to figure out what happened to me. If you can help with that, great. If you want to study me or contain me or use me as a weapon, we're going to have a problem. Silence. The clock on Ozpin's wall ticked. Then Ozpin smiled. Not a big smile, a slight upward turn of the mouth that looked genuine for the first time since they'd started talking. You're direct, Ozpin said. That's refreshing. Most people who sit in that chair tell me what they think I want to hear. I've had bad experiences with authority figures who keep secrets. Haven't we all? Ozpin stood, leaning on his cane. Very well, Mr. Midoriya. I won't insult you with a cover story. You're potentially the most significant individual to appear on Remnant in recorded history. You're also potentially the most dangerous. I'd like to offer you provisional enrollment at Beacon, housing, resources, access to our libraries and training facilities, in exchange for your cooperation in understanding your abilities. And your agreement to remain in contact. I have enemies, Mr. Midoriya. Enemies who will be very interested in what you represent. I'd rather you were here, where I can offer some measure of protection, than out there where they can reach you. Enemies like who? Ozpin's expression shifted. The weariness surfaced again, deep and old and terrible. Her name is Salem. And she will be coming for you. I guarantee it. The name landed in Izuku's mind and stuck there. Salem. He didn't know who she was, but the Grimm essence inside him reacted to the name, a vibration, a recognition, something deep and primal that whispered threat and kin in the same breath. I'll stay, Izuku said. But I'm not your soldier. I wouldn't dream of it. RWBY walked him to the dormitory wing after they left Ozpin's office. The sun was going down, casting long shadows across the academy grounds, and students were heading to dinner in clusters. They gave Izuku curious looks but nobody confronted him. RWBY's presence seemed to grant a degree of social immunity. He knows more than he's telling you, RWBY said quietly. Way more. He does that. Keep secrets. It drives my Uncle Crow crazy. Your uncle? Crow Branwen. He's a huntsman. Works for Ozpin sometimes. He's supposed to check in tomorrow, actually, he's been on a mission in the Outer Territories. Should I be worried about him? RWBY thought about it. He might try to fight you. He does that when he meets new people. Don't take it personally. Noted. They reached a door at the end of a hallway. RWBY opened it, revealing a small but functional room, bed, desk, closet, window overlooking the cliff edge. Spartan but clean. Better than a Grimm-infested cavern. Guest quarters, RWBY said. Ozpin must have texted ahead. He's scary fast with admin stuff. Izuku stepped inside. Chip emerged from his collar and fluttered to the desk, settling on a stack of blank paper. The Grimm bird immediately began shredding the top sheet into a nest. Chip, no. Don't destroy the Chip. Chip ignored him. RWBY laughed. A real, full laugh that lit up the dim room. Oh my God. Your Grimm is making a nest. He does what he wants. I can command 1,000 Beowulfs but this little guy just, Izuku gestured helplessly. Acts out. I love him. You love the Grimm. He's adorable. They stood there, grinning at each other, and for a second it was just, normal. Two teenagers laughing about a weird pet. No dimensional rifts, no existential crises, no ancient enemies. Just this. Then RWBY's expression shifted. She looked at him, really looked at him, and her silver eyes did the flickering thing again. Soft. Warm. The resonance hummed between them, not painful this time, just present. Like a frequency they shared. Hey, Izuku. Yeah. I'm glad I found you. Out there in the forest. I know it's crazy and I know everything's complicated, but I'm glad. Me too, RWBY. She smiled, turned red, mumbled something about dinner being at 7, and practically used her semblance, super speed, which he'd seen her use briefly during the Grimm fight, to flee down the hallway in a burst of rose petals. Izuku stood in the doorway, watching the petals settle on the floor. Chip chirped from his paper nest. Yeah, Izuku said to the bird. I know. He closed the door and sat on the bed, and for the first time since arriving on Remnant, he let himself feel the full weight of everything. Different world. Different body. Powers he didn't understand and couldn't fully control. An ancient enemy he hadn't even met yet. A school full of warriors who might decide he was a monster. And a girl with silver eyes who looked at him and saw a person. He could work with that. 3,000 miles away, in a castle of black stone surrounded by an ocean of Grimm, a woman with white skin and dark veins opened her eyes. Salem had felt many things over the course of her immortal life. The rise and fall of civilizations. The birth of huntsman academies. The slow, grinding war against Ozma's endless reincarnations. She had felt Grimm spawn and Grimm die, felt the pools of darkness pulse with the residual power of a god who'd abandoned his creation. She had never felt this. Something had entered her pools. Something had survived her pools. Something had walked out of them carrying the god of darkness's authority like a crown, and now every Grimm on the continent was reorienting. Not toward her. Toward him. She stood from her throne. The seer Grimm floating beside her projected images, fragmented, incomplete, pulled from the eyes of Grimm who'd been near the emergence site. A boy. Young. Green-haired, green-eyed, marked with Grimm essence but radiating aura. Walking among Grimm that bowed to him like subjects. Salem's fingers tightened on the arms of her throne. The stone cracked under her grip. Interesting, she said. Her voice was calm. It was always calm. Underneath the calm, something that hadn't moved in centuries stirred. My lady. Tyrion Kalos unfolded from the shadows behind her throne, eyes bright with devotion. You seem troubled. Not troubled, Tyrion. Intrigued. Shall I investigate? Hunt. Kill. Observe. Only observe. Find this boy. Learn what he is. Do not engage. Tyrion's smile widened. As you wish, my goddess. He vanished into the shadows, and Salem stood alone in her throne room, staring at the image of a green-haired boy with grim red eyes who had done the impossible. The pools had chosen a king. And Salem did not share power. At the edge of existence, in a space between spaces, two vast presences stirred. The god of darkness felt it first, a tug at the base of his consciousness, a pulling at threads he'd thought long abandoned. Someone was using his essence. Not the crude manipulation that Salem employed, borrowing from the pools like a child playing with fire. This was different. This was someone who had been remade by his power, who carried it in their blood and bones, who wielded it with an authority that approached his own. Impossible, he thought. The pools were never meant to create. Only to destroy. And yet. He reached out across the void to his brother. The god of light was already aware, he always was, the smug, watchful bastard, and his radiance flickered with something that might have been concern. Something has changed on Remnant, the god of darkness said. Something always changes on Remnant, the god of light replied. That is the nature of the experiment. This is different. Something is using my essence. Not borrowing it. Wielding it. As if it were theirs. A pause. The god of light's attention focused, narrowing across dimensions to the tiny, insignificant world they'd left behind. I see it, he said finally. An anomaly. Not of our making. Should we intervene? Not yet. Let us observe. The experiment must be allowed to proceed. The god of darkness withdrew, but a part of his attention remained fixed on Remnant. On a boy sleeping fitfully in a dormitory room, a small Grimm bird curled against his neck, dark veins pulsing with stolen divinity. The game had changed. Neither god was entirely sure how. But they were watching now. Morning at Beacon started with a bell that sounded like a Grimm dying, harsh, resonant, impossible to sleep through. Izuku was up before it rang, having spent most of the night awake, testing his abilities in the privacy of his room. He could extend his Grimm senses further than he'd realized. From Beacon's tower, he could feel every Grimm in the Emerald Forest, every pack in the mountains beyond Vale, every solitary creature lurking in the wilderness for 100 miles in every direction. They were a network, and he was the hub. If he concentrated, he could see through their eyes, hear through their ears, feel what they felt, which was mostly hunger, rage, and an endless pull toward negative emotion. He could also feel something else. Far to the north, past mountains and wastelands, a massive concentration of Grimm essence that dwarfed everything else on the continent. The source. The original pools. And near them, a presence that was simultaneously familiar and alien, someone else who was connected to the Grimm, whose authority intersected with his own. Salem. Had to be. He filed that away and went to find breakfast. The dining hall was chaos. Students everywhere, eating, arguing, showing off weapons, cramming for exams. Izuku grabbed food, the cuisine was different from home but recognizable enough, and found a corner table. He'd barely sat down when RWBY appeared, flanked by 3 other girls. Izuku. These are my teammates. RWBY gestured enthusiastically. Weiss Schnee, Blake Belladonna, Yang Xiao Long Team RWBY. That's us. Weiss was pale, precise, examining Izuku with ice-blue eyes that calculated his threat level in under a second. Blake was dark-haired, quiet, a bow on her head that twitched in a way that suggested it wasn't just a bow. Yang was blonde, built like a fighter, and grinning at him with an expression that was equal parts friendly and challenging. So you're the guy who can control Grimm, Yang said, dropping into the seat across from him. Gotta say, I expected someone taller. Yang, RWBY hissed. What? I'm just saying. I'm also not great at controlling them, Izuku said. More like, suggesting firmly. RWBY says you punched a bandit through a wall. That part I'm good at. Yang's grin widened. I think we're gonna get along. Don't encourage him, Weiss said, sitting with rigid posture. We know almost nothing about him. He could be dangerous. He's definitely dangerous, Blake said quietly, taking the seat next to Izuku. Her amber eyes studied him with an intensity that reminded him of Aizawa-sensei. The question is whether he's a danger to us specifically. I'm trying not to be a danger to anyone specifically, Izuku said. General non-specific danger is kind of unavoidable at this point. Blake's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. They ate together, and Izuku found himself falling into a rhythm that felt achingly familiar. The team dynamics were different from Class 1A, but the energy was the same: friends who fought together, trained together, drove each other crazy. RWBY was the enthusiastic heart. Weiss was the exacting standard. Blake was the quiet observer. Young was the force of nature. He missed his friends. He missed them so much it physically hurt. Chip chose that moment to poke his head out of Izuku's collar and chirp at Young. Young stared. Is that a Grimm? His name is Chip. There's a Grimm on your shoulder. He's friendly. What? Chip chirped at Young again, then fluttered over to her plate and stole a piece of bacon. Young watched, open-mouthed, as the tiny Grimm bird ate the bacon, chirped happily, and flew back to Izuku's shoulder. I love him, Young said immediately. RWBY, why don't we have one? That's what I said. Because it's a Grimm, Weiss said, but she was watching Chip with an expression that was trying very hard to remain disgusted and failing. Blake reached over and gently scratched Chip's head with one finger. The Grimm bird leaned into it and made a purring sound. Blake's bow twitched again. Blake, your bow is moving, Izuku said without thinking. The table went silent. Blake's hand froze. Her eyes widened fractionally. It's fine, Izuku added quickly. Whatever it is. I'm a guy with Grimm powers and a bird named Chip. I don't judge. Blake stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and pulled off the bow, revealing two cat ears perched on top of her head. They swiveled toward Izuku, then flattened. Faunus, she said, like she was daring him to react badly. Cool, Izuku said. Blake blinked. I mean, I have questions. Are those functional? Can you hear frequencies outside normal human range? Does the whole species exhibit animal traits or just some? Is there a, he's muttering again, RWBY said fondly. Sorry. I do that. Blake's ears unflattened. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read but definitely wasn't hostile. Breakfast was interrupted by a message on RWBY's scroll. Ozpin wanted Izuku at the training grounds. Evaluation time. The training ground was a massive arena, tiered seating, reinforced floors, energy barriers around the perimeter. Ozpin was there, along with a tall blonde woman in a white blouse and pencil skirt who radiated, "Don't waste my time" energy from every pore. Mr. Midoriya, Ozpin said. This is Professor Glinda Goodwitch. She oversees combat training at Beacon. Glinda looked at Izuku like she was evaluating a potentially unstable explosive. Which, fair. The headmaster has explained your situation, Glinda said. I need to assess your combat capabilities. Standard evaluation protocol. Against who? Me. RWBY, watching from the stands with her team, winced. Ooh. Glinda doesn't go easy. Good, Izuku said, and stepped into the arena. Glinda Goodwitch was terrifying. Her semblance, telekinesis, Izuku identified almost immediately, gave her complete battlefield control. She didn't even draw a weapon at first, she just gestured, and chunks of the arena floor ripped free and hurtled at him. Izuku dodged the first barrage, bone armor forming across his arms and torso. A stone block the size of a car caught him in the ribs and he slid back 3 feet. It hurt, but nothing broke. He dug his fingers into the stone as it pushed him, cracked it apart, and threw the pieces back. Glinda deflected them with a wave of her riding crop. Your durability is impressive. Let's test your speed. She launched a rapid-fire assault, debris from every direction, each piece tracking him with telekinetic precision. Izuku moved on instinct, his enhanced reflexes reading trajectories and exploiting gaps. He closed distance in bursts, getting closer to Glinda with each dodge. "He's fast," Yang said in the stands, leaning forward. "He's analyzing her," Weiss corrected, watching with narrow eyes. "Look at his movement pattern. He's not just dodging, he's mapping her range and reaction time." Izuku got within 10 feet. Glinda caught him with a telekinetic grip, invisible force locking around his body, lifting him off the ground. He felt the pressure, acknowledged it, and pushed back. Not with physical strength. With his Grimm essence. The dark energy pulsed outward from his body in a wave, disrupting Glinda's telekinetic hold the same way it disrupted Grimm behavior. Her control flickered. Izuku dropped, landed on his feet, and closed the remaining distance before she could re-establish her grip. He pulled the punch. Stopped his fist an inch from her face, bone armor dissolving as his fingers uncurled. "You're good," he said. Glinda stared at him. She was breathing hard, not from exhaustion, but from surprise. Nobody had broken her telekinetic hold through sheer force of will before. "You disrupted my semblance," she said. "Your semblance works through aura projection. My Grimm essence interferes with aura-based abilities. I figured it out about halfway through." Halfway through. The fight lasted 40 seconds. "I'm a fast learner." Up in the stands, Ozpin watched the exchange and sipped his coffee. His expression gave away nothing, but his free hand gripped his cane hard enough to whiten his knuckles. The evaluation continued for another hour. Glinda tested his strength. He punched through a reinforced training dummy designed to withstand huntsman-level attacks, his speed, he outran her projectile tracking, his durability, she dropped a section of the arena ceiling on him and he caught it, and his Grimm abilities. He summoned 3 Beowulfs from the Emerald Forest and commanded them through a series of complex maneuvers. The Beowulfs obeyed with mechanical precision, attacking designated targets, retreating on command, even cooperating with each other in formations that wild Grimm would never use. Glinda watched with an expression caught between professional fascination and deep unease. "Enough," she said finally. "You are, without question, the most dangerous student-age combatant I have ever evaluated." "Thanks." That was not a compliment. It was a threat assessment. She turned to Ozpin. "He's beyond anything our standard curriculum can challenge. And his ability to disrupt aura-based semblances makes him a potential threat to every huntsman and huntress on this campus. Which is precisely why I'd rather he be here than elsewhere," Ozpin said mildly. Glinda's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I'll develop a custom training program. But I want it on record that I have reservations." "Noted, Glinda." As always. After the evaluation, Izuku found himself alone on the cliffside behind the dormitory wing. Veil spread out below him, glittering in the afternoon sun. The Emerald Forest was a green carpet beyond the city walls, and somewhere in its depths, his Grimm waited. He sat on the edge and let his awareness expand. The Grimm network stretched out around him, thousands of points of dark consciousness, each one connected to him by a thread of authority. He could feel their hunger, their rage, their endless drive to destroy. And underneath all of it, so faint he might have imagined it, something else. A loneliness. A yearning. Like the Grimm knew, on some level too deep for conscious thought, that they were incomplete. Created to destroy, never to build. Weapons without purpose beyond devastation. "You think too loud." Izuku turned. Ruby stood behind him, crescent rose folded across her back, rose petals still settling around her feet. "Speed semblance?" he asked. "Yeah. I turn into rose petals and go zoom." Technical term. She sat down next to him on the cliff edge, legs dangling. For a minute they just sat, watching the sun move across the sky. "Ozpin talked to me," Ruby said. "After your evaluation. He wanted to know what I thought of you." "And?" I told him you're a good person with scary powers who names his Grimm and mutters when he's thinking and asked if I was okay before he asked what I was. What did he say? Nothing. He just did that thing where he sips his coffee and looks mysterious. Izuku snorted. But hey, RWBY continued, and her voice got quieter. More serious. He also told me about Salem. The broad strokes, ancient enemy, controls Grimm, wants to destroy everything. And he said she'd come for you. I figured. Are you scared? Izuku thought about it honestly. No. I'm concerned. I'm cautious. But I've fought people who wanted to destroy everything before. In my world, there was a man called All for One who, he stopped. Swallowed. He took everything from my mentor. And I fought him anyway, because that's what you do. You fight. Not because you're brave, but because the alternative is letting people get hurt. RWBY's silver eyes shimmered. You sound like my mom. Your mom? Summer Rose. She was a huntress. The best, according to everyone who knew her. She went on a mission when I was little and never came back. I'm sorry. It's okay. I mean, it's not. But she taught me something before she left. She said that the world's full of monsters, and that's scary, but what's scarier is not doing anything about it. RWBY pulled her knees up to her chest. I think she'd like you. Izuku didn't know what to say to that. So he didn't say anything. He just sat with RWBY on the cliff edge, watching the sun go down, feeling the Grimm in the forest below them settle into an uneasy peace under his influence. Chip flew out of his collar and landed on RWBY's head. She giggled. Chip, you traitor, Izuku said. He has good taste. RWBY reached up and scratched the tiny Grimm's head. Izuku? Yeah. Whatever happens with Salem, or Ozpin, or any of it, you're not alone. Okay. You've got me. And my team. And probably Glinda, once she stops being scared of you. She's scared of me. She's scared of what you represent. There's a difference. That's very insightful. I have my moments. In the darkness at the base of the cliff, hidden in shadows that even Grimm's senses couldn't penetrate, Tyrion Kalos crouched on a tree branch and watched the two figures silhouetted against the sunset. The boy. The Grimm King. Tyrion could feel him, a pressure, a weight, an authority that pressed against his mind like a hand around his throat. Every Grimm instinct in Tyrion's enhanced body screamed to kneel, to submit, to worship. He licked his lips. Observe only, his goddess had commanded. And Tyrion was nothing if not obedient. But as he watched the boy talk with the silver-eyed girl, as he noted the way the Grimm in the forest bowed and retreated and obeyed, as he felt the raw, impossible power emanating from this child who had stolen from the pools of his goddess, Tyrion's tail twitched behind him. The scorpion stinger flexed, dripping venom. Observe only. For now. Chapter 2, Dominion 3 weeks. That's how long it took Beacon to stop feeling like enemy territory and start feeling like something adjacent to home. Izuku didn't trust the feeling, he'd learned from experience that comfort was the first thing that got ripped away, but he stopped sleeping with his back to the wall and started sleeping with Chip on his pillow, which was basically the same thing. His provisional enrollment came with conditions. Check in with Glinda daily. Wear a scroll at all times so Ozpin could reach him. Don't leave Vale's outer perimeter without informing the Academy. Standard, we're keeping tabs on you but pretending we're not, protocol that Izuku recognized from UA's handling of Class 1A after the USJ incident. He complied. Partly because it was reasonable. Partly because he was using the time to learn everything he could about Remnant, and Beacon's library had more information than anywhere else he could access. Blake helped. She'd apparently read everything in the library at least twice and could retrieve any relevant text with terrifying speed. The pools are referenced in pre-Huntsman records, Blake told him one night, dropping a stack of books onto the study table. Not by name. They're called the wellspring of endings in one text, the gods refuse in another. Charming. The records stop about 4,000 years ago. Like someone decided to stop writing about them. Or someone removed the records. Blake's cat ears flattened. Ozpin. Maybe. Or whoever was running things before Ozpin. Izuku pulled the nearest book toward him. What about people who were changed by them? Anyone in the historical record? One mention. A warrior who supposedly fell into the pools and emerged, clothed in darkness. He's described as invincible, but the text calls him a monster. He disappears from the records after one battle. What battle? He apparently fought Salem's forces. Izuku and Blake looked at each other across the table. And? Izuku said. The text ends there. Page is missing. Blake tapped the ragged edge where a page had been cut out. Clean cut. Recent, the paper edges hadn't yellowed like the rest of the book. Someone's been in this library recently, Izuku said. Yes. And they knew exactly what to remove. Izuku leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Ozpin keeps secrets. We established that. But active document removal means he's been expecting something like me for a while. He's been preparing. Or preventing. Blake's voice was quiet, careful. There's a difference between preparing for an event and making sure certain knowledge about it stays contained. That sat between them for a moment. Hey, Izuku said. Can I ask you something? About the Faunus thing? Blake's expression went neutral. You can ask. It's just, the way people treated you that first morning at breakfast. Some of the students. I noticed. Students, faculty, half of Vale. She shrugged, but it wasn't a casual shrug. It had too much history behind it. Faunus are second-class citizens in most of Remnant. It varies by kingdom, but the baseline is discrimination. Some places it's overt. Others it's just, structural. That's garbage. Blake blinked. She'd clearly been expecting more hedging. Yes. It is. I had a friend back home, well, more like a mentor situation, but, there was something similar. People with powers that others found threatening, treated as weapons or threats instead of people. It doesn't matter what world you're in. Fear makes people do the same things. Blake was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, the White Fang started as a civil rights movement. They were peaceful, organized, legitimate. Then the violence started, and she stopped. You were part of it, Izuku said. Not an accusation. Just an observation. Yes. And you left. When the violence stopped being a means and became the point. Yes. Izuku nodded. Didn't push. Blake looked at him like she'd expected pushing and wasn't sure what to do with the absence of it. You're strange, she said finally. So I've been told. I mean that as a compliment. He smiled. She looked away, but the tips of her cat ears were slightly pink. Combat training with Glinda was happening every morning now. Not evaluation anymore, actual training, with Glinda designing specific scenarios to push Izuku's limits and identify gaps. She was, despite her reservations, an exceptional teacher. Precise, demanding, impatient with anything less than full effort, but genuinely invested in results. Your Grimm command has range and breadth, but your direct precision is inconsistent, she said on day 15, watching Izuku try to guide 3 Beowulfs through a simultaneous coordinated attack on separate targets. 2 of them hit perfectly. The third veered off and ran into a wall. You can broadcast authority across thousands of creatures, but focused individual control degrades quickly after 3 units. I know. I'm working on the, he stopped, redirected the wandering Beowulf, tried again. It's like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. Times 3. Times 1,000. Then practice until it becomes automatic. You sound like my old teacher. I'll take that as a compliment. Who was your teacher? Izuku paused. The greatest hero in the world. Where I come from. Glinda studied him. For the first time since he'd met her, her expression was something other than assessment. Something more human. Do you miss him? Every day. She didn't say anything else. She reset the training scenario and ran it again. But she pushed him a little less hard for the rest of the session, and he pretended not to notice. Yang found him in the gym 3 nights later. Not by accident, Yang didn't do things by accident, she just framed them that way. You train late, she said, dropping her gym bag by the door. Couldn't sleep. You. I heard banging from 3 floors up. She looked at the training dummy he'd been hitting. It was dented in ways that training dummies weren't supposed to be. Rough night? Izuku looked at his hands. The bone armor was still dissolved but his knuckles were dark with the Grimm veins running close to the surface. I dreamed about home. Yang sat down on the mat, cross-legged, casual. Good dream or bad one? Both. Mostly bad. The end part. He didn't elaborate. Yang didn't ask him to. My mom left when I was a baby, Yang said. Different mom from Ruby's. We have different moms. Ruby's mom Summer died on a mission, my biological mom Raven just left. Decided she didn't want to be there. Izuku sat down across from her. That's brutal. Yeah, well. I spent a lot of years chasing leads on her. Trying to find her. Like if I could just find her, I'd understand why she went. Yang flexed her fingers, and her eyes shifted from lilac to red for a second, her semblance activating and settling. I don't need her anymore. But sometimes I still feel that kid who did. You're telling me this because I looked like I needed something to compare to. I'm telling you this because you looked like someone who carries things alone and calls it strength. She met his eyes. I know that look because I have a mirror. The gym was quiet. From outside came the distant sound of Vale's nightlife, music, traffic, the muted world of a city that never fully slept. What was he like? Yang asked. Your teacher. The greatest man I ever met. Strong and kind and a little bit ridiculous. Izuku's voice went rough at the edges. He gave me everything he had and I didn't protect him well enough. Is he dead? No. But he's not what he was. And that's because of me. Or because of the villain who hurt him. Both. Yang was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up, moved to the practice area, and raised her fists. Fight me. Yang, not to prove anything. Not to evaluate. Just to fight. Because sometimes that's the only thing that makes the noise stop. Her eyes went red again, but steady this time. Come on, Grim King. Let's see what you've got. He fought her. It was nothing like fighting Glinda. Glinda was controlled, technical, economical. Yang was a force of nature, she threw herself into every exchange with total commitment, her semblance absorbing his hits and converting them into fuel that made her stronger and harder with every impact. He couldn't hit her the same way twice. She adapted, pushed, redirected. And she was fun to fight. That was the unexpected part. There was a joy in it, not the desperate urgency of his battles back home, not the life-or-death weight of fighting all for one. Just 2 people who were very good at hitting things together. She caught him with an uppercut that would have launched him through the ceiling if he hadn't braced with a Grimm-enhanced stance. He came back with a sweep that she jumped, turning it into an aerial kick that he caught on a bone-armored forearm. They ended up on the mat, both of them breathing hard, Izuku with his forearm across Yang's collarbone pinning her down, Yang with her arm across his jaw in a return lock. A half-second standoff. Yang started laughing first. It was the kind of laugh that starts in the gut and works its way up, full and genuine and unself-conscious. Izuku couldn't help it, he laughed too. Okay, Yang said, still pinned. Okay. You're actually incredible. You're terrifying. I know. She looked up at him from the mat, and the humor was still there but something else was too, something warmer, evaluating in a different way than when they'd started. You pulled your punches. I wasn't trying to hurt you. You were going easy. I was going appropriate. She let him up. They both sat on the mat, shoulders almost touching, cooling down. For the record, she said, I don't do things by accident. Coming down here. I know. Just making sure we're on the same page. We're on the same page, Yang. She grinned. Tilted her head to rest briefly on his shoulder, just for a second, like punctuation. Then she was up, grabbing her bag, back to her casual swagger. Same time tomorrow? Probably. Good. She walked out. Chip, who had been watching from a shelf, chirped at Izuku with what sounded like smug satisfaction. Don't start, Izuku told him. 4 days later, the convoy attack happened. The message came through Glinda's office, a Schnee Dust Company transport, 60 miles southeast of Vale, under Grimm attack. Standard response procedure, send available huntsmen, clear the Grimm, escort the convoy to safety. Weiss found Izuku before Glinda's dispatch team did. I'm going, Weiss said. Her voice had that quality it got when she'd already decided and was informing him rather than asking. That's our convoy. Schnee family goods. I need to be there. We can ride with the dispatch team, Izuku said. Weiss blinked. You're coming. The Grimm might be harder to clear if they're agitated. I can calm them down faster than a standard team. He paused. Also, you're clearly going regardless of what anyone says, and you shouldn't go alone. Her chin came up. I don't need protection. Not protection. Backup. There's a difference. A beat. Weiss reassessed him with those ice blue eyes. Fine. Let's go. Winter was already with the dispatch team when they boarded the Bullhead, a vertical takeoff aircraft that Izuku had been flying in for 2 weeks and still found fascinating. She stood at the front of the transport in full Atlesian military dress, spine absolutely rigid, and looked at Izuku with an expression that said she was filing detailed mental notes. You're the Grimm King, she said. I've been called that. Izuku Midoriya. Winter Schnee. A pause. Specialist Winter Schnee, Atlesian Special Operatives. My orders include observing and evaluating you. I figured. You've been in Vale for a week and I keep seeing you in places I happen to be. Winter's expression flickered. Half a second of surprise, quickly smoothed over. You noticed. I notice everything in my vicinity. Grimm senses. Sorry. She didn't apologize for the surveillance. He respected that. I should tell you that my assessment of your threat level currently sits at critical. What would change that? Demonstrated restraint. Demonstrated that your power operates within a comprehensible moral framework. Then pay attention today. He turned to watch the emerald forest pass below them. You'll see what you need to see. The convoy was 4 vehicles spread across a mountain road, surrounded by a Grimm pack that had grown during the attack, negative emotion drawing more creatures in. Standard snowball effect. About 40 Beowulfs and 3 Ursai, with a Deathstalker moving in from the eastern slope. The Bullhead was still a mile out when Izuku extended his command. All 40 Beowulfs stopped. The Ursai sat down. The Deathstalker halted mid-stride and stood motionless on the slope, stinger raised but aimed at nothing. The Bullhead landed. The dispatch team stepped out with weapons ready and found a mountain road cleared of active Grimm, all the creatures frozen at varying distances, pointed toward the convoy but going nowhere. What? One of the dispatch huntsmen started. Give me a minute, Izuku said, walking between the stationary Grimm. He moved through them, pressing his awareness against the pack's collective consciousness. Wild Grimm were simpler than he'd thought at first, basic emotional resonance, hardwired response patterns. He could feel why they'd attacked. The convoy had been broadcasting fear for hours, long enough to draw a pack. And underneath the pack's aggression, now, he could feel something else. A signal. A direction. A push. Someone had guided these Grimm here. Not crude, not obvious, but a nudge, a channeling of their natural aggression toward a specific target at a specific time. This wasn't natural, Izuku told Weiss, who'd fallen into step beside him. Someone directed them. Weiss's jaw tightened. Who? Whoever has influence over Grimm. He met her eyes. There are two of us. Me, and the one who owned this before I showed up. Salem. She's making a move. But not at random, she targeted your convoy specifically. He looked at the crates stacked on the convoy vehicles. What are you carrying? Dust. Raw crystals, unprocessed. About 4 tons of violet dust, the gravity manipulation variant. It's worth more than most kingdom budgets. And if the Grimm had broken the crates? Weiss went pale. Unprocessed dust doesn't explode from Grimm claws. But it destabilizes. Scatters as particulate. In the quantities we're transporting, she swallowed. It could have irradiated the surrounding area for decades. Made this mountain range uninhabitable. So the goal wasn't to kill your people. It was to deny Remnant a region. Salem's been doing this for years. Slowly. Methodically. Cutting off resources, isolating populations. Weiss's voice was controlled but her hands were not, they were tight fists at her sides. My family has fought it for 3 generations. My father's approach is to militarize. Increase security, build walls, treat it like a logistics problem. And your approach? I don't have one yet. I'm not in charge. She said it flatly, but underneath the flatness was something that had been pressing against it for a long time. I'm the heir. I'm supposed to agree with Jacques Schnee's methods until he decides I've earned the right to disagree. That sounds terrible. It is. She looked at him, and for a second the ice-blue eyes were just tired. How do you decide what's right when everyone with power is choosing between bad options? I pick the option that puts the most vulnerable people last in line for harm. It doesn't always work. But it's a framework. Weiss looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to the convoy workers, a mix of humans and faunus, Izuku noted, the faunus doing the physically harder labor, the humans in the supervisory roles, and walked toward the nearest faunus man who was crouched against one of the vehicle tires, shaking. Are you hurt? She asked him. Her voice had the same quality Izuku used, first question, always the same. The man stared at her. Miss Schnee, are you hurt? No, miss. Just, scared. Understandable. You're safe now. We're going to get everyone moving in 10 minutes. She turned back to Izuku. He said nothing. She raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing. Just, yeah. You're going to be fine. Her cheeks went slightly pink and she looked away. Don't be patronizing. I meant it genuinely. I know. That's why it's irritating. But the corners of her mouth moved. Almost imperceptibly. Winter had been watching the entire exchange from the bullhead's ramp. Izuku could feel her attention without turning around. When he finally walked back to the aircraft, she was waiting. You could have used them, she said. The Grimm. Turned them loose on the convoy and called it a natural attack. Yes. But you didn't. No. Why? Izuku looked at her. Because they're people. The convoy workers. They have families and rent and things they haven't finished yet. Same as everyone. He paused. Same as you, probably. Winter blinked. Her military composure held, but it held the way ice holds over water. You could see the movement underneath. I'll be adjusting my threat assessment. What to? Significant. But not critical. She stepped back into the bullhead. Don't make me regret it. He didn't say he wouldn't. He didn't know if he could promise that. But he got on the bullhead, and the convoy started moving, and the Grimm he'd frozen dispersed harmlessly back into the wilderness, and for a few hours everything was fine. The message from Salem came at midnight. Not a scroll message. Not a letter. She just appeared. Izuku felt her first, a massive concentration of Grimm essence to the northwest, building fast, approaching Beacon's perimeter like a storm front. He was out of bed and dressed before the Academy's Grimm sensor started screaming, pulling on his boots and telling Chip to stay in the room while he moved through the corridor. RWBY was already in the hallway. She'd clearly felt it too, her silver eyes were active, that faint white shimmer building behind her irises like a lamp warming up. Something's coming, she said. Salem. RWBY's expression went through several things fast. How do you know? I can feel her. She's Grimm adjacent, like me. We're both connected to the pools. He started walking. Don't try to stop me. I wasn't going to. I was going to say I'm coming with you. He turned. RWBY, she's the single most dangerous person on Remnant and you've been here 3 weeks and you still don't know everything you can do. Her voice was calm. Too calm, the way people get when they've already made the decision and arguing is just noise. I'm coming. My silver eyes do something to Grimm, we saw it in the forest, with you. I don't know what they'll do to her. They might do it to me too. They haven't since that first day. They adjusted. She stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the silver light clearly, pulsing steady. I'll watch your back. You watch mine. That's how team works. We're not a team. We've been a team since you told me to stop and asked if I was okay. She grabbed his arm, pulled him into motion. Now let's go. They went. Yang appeared from around a corner 30 seconds later, shotgun gauntlets on, hair still slightly sleep-rumpled. I felt you both leave. Where are we going? Salem, RWBY said. Yang's eyes went red. Cool. Let's go. The three of them moved through Beacon's back paths, past the training grounds, through the gate that led to the cliff trail, down to the flat ground beyond Beacon's perimeter. The night was clear and cold. The broken moon threw white light across the grass. She was waiting at the edge of the tree line. Salem was, Izuku had tried to prepare himself, had read descriptions, had imagined what she'd look like. He hadn't been prepared. She was tall, dressed in something that moved like liquid shadow, skin white as chalk, dark veins visible on her hands and neck, the same kind of veins he had, but more pronounced, deeper, a map of the god of darkness's power worn on the outside. Her hair fell in silver-white waves. Her eyes were red and gold and absolutely ancient. She looked at Izuku and smiled. Not predatory. Not villainous. Just, fascinated. The way a scientist looks at an unexpected result. So, she said. Her voice was smooth and low and carried across the grass without effort. The pools made something new. You're Salem, Izuku said. And you're the boy who survived the wellspring. She tilted her head, studying him. I felt it when you emerged. The pools have never before chosen to preserve a life. They consume. They transform. They create Grimm. Her eyes moved across his body, cataloging. And yet here you stand. Aura intact. Soul present. Grimm authority absolute. A pause. How? I don't know. Honest. I appreciate that. She stepped forward. RWBY's hand moved to her weapon. Salem glanced at RWBY with an expression that was almost amused. Easy, little Rose. I didn't come here to fight. You came to recruit, Izuku said. Salem's smile widened. Not recruit. Invite. There's a distinction. She stopped 10 feet from him. Up close, the pull was stronger, the Grimm essence in both of them resonating, two instruments tuned to similar frequencies. You've been at Beacon for 3 weeks. Ozpin has told you carefully curated fragments of truth, designed to position you as his resource. He's always been a collector of useful people. Her voice carried a specific weight on Ozpin's name. Centuries of it. You know him well, Izuku said. Intimately. The word landed hard. We have a history that predates this kingdom, this academy, this age of humanity. What has he told you about it? Nothing. Of course. Salem moved to circle him slightly, not a predator circling, more like someone who found standing still boring. He will tell you eventually. A partial version. He'll frame himself as the defender, me as the destroyer, and leave out the parts where his choices created exactly as much suffering as mine. She stopped. Looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to believe me over him. I'm asking you to understand that there are more than two sides. I know that already. Salem paused. That had surprised her. I've been in this world 3 weeks and I've already identified at least 4 factions with competing agendas, Izuku said. Ozpin, Atlas under Ironwood, Salem, and the civilian populations that everyone claims to be fighting for. You all have philosophies. You all have history. You all think you're right. He met her red gold eyes. That doesn't tell me which of you I should trust. Then what would? Actions. Over time. Which is why I'm not going anywhere with you today. Salem was quiet. The amusement hadn't left her face, but beneath it something was shifting, recalibrating. She'd expected fear, probably. Or fascination. Or defensive posturing. She hadn't expected a 3-week-old newcomer to calmly explain why he was assessing her the same way he'd assess anyone else. What's your name? She asked. Your actual name. The Grimm King is a title. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku. She said it like she was testing the sound of it. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who needed something from me. People always need something. Power, knowledge, protection, vengeance. She tilted her head. What do you need, Izuku? The question landed differently than her other words. More genuine. Like the script had dropped for a second. Right now. To understand what I am. What happened to me. Whether I can go home, and if I can't, what I'm supposed to do here. He paused. What do you need, Salem? The shift in her expression was subtle. Tiny. If he hadn't been watching closely, if the Grimm essence linking them hadn't given him a secondary sense of her emotional state, he would have missed it. Something cracked. Not broke, cracked. A hairline fracture in a surface that had been solid for millennia. That, she said quietly, is not a question anyone has asked me in a very long time. I'm asking it now. Salem looked at him. Just looked at him, and for a second the ancient war and the immortal curse and the centuries of accumulated hatred and pain were completely visible in her face. Not because she let them show, she was too controlled for that. But because she was genuinely surprised, and surprise broke through control in ways that nothing else did. She took a step back. Put the mask back on. I'll be watching, Izuku Midoriya. When Ozpin's patience runs out, and it will, my offer stands. She turned. The darkness at the tree line rose up around her and she was gone, the Grimm essence pulling away from the area like a tide going out. RWBY let out a breath she'd been holding. That was wild, young finished. Her eyes had gone back to Lilac somewhere in the conversation. Izuku, you just had a chat with the most evil person on the planet and somehow made her look, I don't know, thoughtful. She looked thoughtful. She's not what I expected either, Izuku said. She's still the enemy, RWBY said, but she said it carefully, like she was checking that it still applied and wasn't sure. She might be. Or she might be more complicated than that. I don't know yet. He turned back toward Beacon. But she's lonely. Whatever else she is, she's been alone for a very long time, and I don't think she knows what to do with someone who asks how she is instead of what she wants. They walked back to campus in silence. Yang nudged his shoulder with hers as they went, a wordless acknowledgement. He nudged back. He didn't see the scroll notification waiting in his room until he returned. Crow Branwen, checking in from the outer territories. A message to Ozpin, the pools were disturbed 3 weeks ago. I saw the aftermath. Something came out. You need to tell me what's happening, Oz. Below it, Ozpin's response, come to Beacon. We need to talk. And below that, another message, this one to Izuku's personal scroll, from an Atlesian military identifier. From Ironwood's direct line, I'll be at Beacon in 48 hours. I expect a meeting. Izuku read both messages. Looked at Chip, who was sitting on his paper nest with an expression that suggested he understood the implications. Yeah, Izuku said. Me too. 48 hours later, Ironwood arrived. Not quietly. The Atlas Air Fleet didn't do anything quietly, for military bullheads in formation, Atlas Knights in gleaming white deployed at Beacon's landing pad, Ironwood stepping down the ramp in full uniform with a half-cybernetic posture that conveyed authority the way a wall conveyed obstacle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, the kind of man who looked like he'd been designed to command things. Winter fell into step behind him with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She caught Izuku's eye across the landing pad and gave him the smallest possible nod. Ozpin met them in the courtyard. Glinda flanked him, riding crop in hand. Crow Branwen leaned against a pillar nearby, arms crossed, his scroll-shaped weapon visible at his hip. He'd arrived yesterday, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, permanently sour expression that cracked occasionally into something warmer, and he'd spent most of his time watching Izuku with the focused attention of someone deciding where in the threat hierarchy a new variable belonged. Izuku wasn't invited to the initial meeting. Which meant he attended it anyway, having sent Chip through an air vent with a small scroll microphone rubber-banded to the bird's leg. Chip was an excellent spy. He chirped very quietly. Security threat of the highest order, Ironwood was saying when the audio connected. His voice had the same texture as his posture, no wasted words, no unnecessary inflection. A being with Grimm authority who is currently unregistered, unaffiliated, and operating within a civilian educational institution. Izuku Midoriya is our guest, Ozpin said. And he's demonstrated nothing but good faith since his arrival. 3 weeks of good faith doesn't neutralize a capability profile like this, Ozpin. One command from him and every Grimm within 100 miles, would what? Attack? He's been suppressing Grimm aggression near Vale since he arrived. Our incident rate is down 40%. Or he's been selectively managing it to create dependence. Classic force multiplier strategy, you suppress the threat, making yourself indispensable, then you reintroduce the threat at maximum leverage. You've been reading too many military strategy manuals. And you've been reading too many fairy tales. This boy is a weapon, Ozpin. Whether he knows it or not. Izuku had heard enough. He removed Chip's microphone remotely, the bird chirped in protest, and walked to Ozpin's conference room. He opened the door without knocking. The room went quiet. Ironwood looked at him with exactly the expression of someone whose threat assessment has just strolled through the door uninvited. Crow raised an eyebrow. Glinda pressed her lips together. I could hear you from the corridor, Izuku said. It was a lie, he'd heard them through Chip, but a useful one. I thought I should be present for a conversation about me. Ironwood recovered fast. Mr. Midoriya. I was about to request your presence. Were you? Izuku took the empty chair at the table and sat. What did you want to know? The meeting that followed was the most unpleasant hour Izuku had spent since arriving on Remnant, and that included the full-body transformation in a pool of living darkness. Ironwood was intelligent, genuinely, frustratingly intelligent, and his concerns weren't wrong. A person with unregistered Grimm authority operating near a civilian population was a security risk. The fact that Izuku didn't intend harm didn't eliminate the potential for it. But Ironwood's solution was what Izuku had expected and couldn't accept. Atlas facility. Monitored environment. Controlled access. An official designation as a special resource, with military oversight. A cage, Izuku said. A secure location, a cage. You're proposing a very comfortable cage with a title that sounds better than prisoner. Ironwood's jaw set. I'm proposing the minimum security measures required, to make you feel better about something you can't control. Izuku kept his voice level. General Ironwood. You're scared of me. That's understandable. I'm scared of me too, sometimes. But putting me in a box doesn't make Remnant safer. It just makes you feel like you've done something. You're a student, I'm not a student. I'm not your soldier, your asset, or your problem. I'm a person who has chosen to be here, helping where I can, and the moment you try to make that choice for me is the moment I become a problem you actually need to worry about. The room was very quiet. Ironwood looked at Ozpin. Ozpin looked back with an expression that said he'd seen this coming and hadn't prepared a solution. He stays, Crow said from his corner. Everyone looked at him. He's right, James. You cage something, it bites. You let it choose its own leash, it stays. Ironwood stood. I'll be back, Mr. Midoriya. And I'll expect continued access for assessment. You'll get courtesy, Izuku said. Same as anyone. Winter caught him after Ironwood left, in the hallway outside the conference room. For what it's worth, she said quietly, he's not wrong about the risk. I know. But he's not right about the solution. I know that too. She studied him. I filed my assessment this morning. I designated you as significant risk, non-hostile, recommended continued monitored cooperation over containment. Thank you. Don't thank me. I did it because it's the accurate assessment. A pause. Her posture shifted, infinitesimally, but enough. If your situation becomes something you're not sure how to navigate. My scroll is on the beacon system. Izuku looked at her. The military bearing was real and it wasn't performed, but underneath it was someone who made judgment calls with their gut even when their orders said to use their head. He'd seen it in the convoy situation. He was seeing it again now. I'll keep that in mind, he said. She gave him a short nod and walked away, heels crisp on the stone floor. The Blake conversation came 3 days later, late at night in the library, after everyone else had gone. Can I show you something? She asked, and led him to the back of the library's restricted section. Beacon had one, because of course it did, where an old cabinet held journals that predated the current kingdoms. I've been researching the Grimm, she said, pulling one of the journals out. Not the combat profiles. The origin texts. The religious ones. The God of Darkness. There's a recurring concept in pre-Ozpin religious texts. The idea that Grimm aren't inherently evil. That they're incomplete. She opened the journal. The script was old, cramped, partially in a language Izuku couldn't read. They were created without souls, the God of Darkness made them as a counterbalance to humanity, which the God of Light had created with souls and purpose. The Grimm had form and function but she searched for the word. No interiority. No self. I felt that, Izuku said quietly. When I first made contact with them. The loneliness underneath the aggression. Like they're hungry for something that can't be dust or destruction. Blake looked at him. The text suggests that a Grimm with soul connection, with aura, would be something fundamentally new. Not just more powerful. More whole. She paused. When you command Grimm, do they obey because they're afraid of you? No. That's the thing. Wild Grimm fear me, initially, that instinct. But my Grimm, the ones I've worked with, it's not fear. It's more like, he searched for it. Recognition. Like I'm the missing piece. The soul they don't have individually is partly accessible through me, the connection to me. So commanding them might be the wrong frame. Yeah. I've been thinking that. He looked at the journal page. What if, instead of commanding, I gave them actual direction? Actual purpose? Not, attack this target but, protect this place. Could you do that? I don't know. Maybe. But it would mean treating them as, not people, exactly. But beings with enough interiority to hold purpose. Which is more than most people on Remnant are willing to grant them. Which is exactly why I want to try. He met her eyes. Blake. The way you talked about the White Fang, about the movement having a point before it became corrupted, I've been thinking about that. What if the Grimm are the biggest civil rights problem on Remnant, and nobody's framing it that way because it sounds insane? Blake stared at him. I said it might sound insane, he added. No, she said slowly. No, it doesn't sound insane. It sounds like the kind of idea that gets people called dangerous before they're proven right. Her cat ears were fully forward now, alert. It also sounds like an idea that could be weaponized by anyone who wanted to justify Grimm attacks. Yeah. Which is why I'd need to demonstrate it first. Show that Grimm under genuine purposive command aren't just suppressed, they're different. Behaviorally, functionally different. How would you demonstrate that? Probably by having them do something nobody believes Grimm can do. He thought. Something creative. Blake's eyes widened slowly as the idea hit her. You want to have Grimm build something. I want to have Grimm protect something. Build infrastructure. Maintain a safe zone. Take the defining function, destruction, and invert it. He spread his hands. It's theory. I don't know if it works. But I want to try. Blake closed the journal carefully. I want to help with this. I was hoping you'd say that. She smiled. It was small and deliberate and completely genuine. You're the most interesting person I've met in years, Izuku. That's either a compliment or an indication that you need to meet more people. Both, probably. Tyrion moved on a Thursday. Not because Salem ordered it. She had specifically ordered otherwise. Tyrion moved because Tyrion had his own reasons, his own calculations, and his own fury that had been building since the moment Salem came back from the beacon perimeter looking shaken in a way that she would never admit to. He'd watched her. He always watched her. And he'd seen the fraction of difference in how she held herself, the slight softening around her eyes when she said the name Izuku Midoriya, and it had burned in his chest like a brand. His goddess didn't soften. His goddess was beyond human weakness. And if something was making her soft, it needed to be removed. He targeted the girl. The silver-eyed one, Ruby Rose. He'd read the old texts too. Silver eyes were the god of light's gift to specific bloodlines, the ability to manifest pure creation energy against Grimm. Against Salem. They were a threat he'd been monitoring for months. Killing a silver-eyed warrior served two purposes. It removed a threat to Salem's plans and it hurt the Grimm King in a way that would be personal, immediate, and devastating. He moved at 3 a.m. Campus security was optimized for Grimm detection, not for a human-sized target with scorpion biology who could suppress his own emotional signature. He got to the dormitory building without triggering a single alert. He got down the hallway to Team RWBY's room. He got his hand on the door handle. The hall lights came on. Izuku stood at the other end of the corridor. He was dressed, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd felt Tyrion coming despite the suppression, Grimm essence reading something the security systems couldn't. His eyes were grim red in the fluorescent light, the dark veins on his arms fully visible where his sleeves were pushed up. "You should leave," Izuku said. His voice was very quiet. Tyrion's tail came up. His smile split his face wide. "My goddess wants to observe you. I want to kill something connected to you. We have different agendas tonight. Your goddess is more interesting than you. You're just someone who breaks things because he doesn't know how to make them." Pretty words from a corpse to be. Tyrion moved. He was fast, faster than anything Izuku had fought at Beacon, faster than the bandits and the Grimm and the dispatch huntsmen. He covered the corridor in a blur, scorpion tail arcing over his head toward Izuku's throat, a knife in each hand moving independently in patterns designed to overwhelm simultaneous tracking. Izuku read the first feint. Stepped inside the knife sweep, took the stinger graze on the bone armor along his shoulder, it numbed his arm, the venom hitting his system and beginning to process, and drove his elbow into Tyrion's face. Tyrion rolled with it, used the wall to launch back, came at Izuku from the side with the knives leading. Izuku's arm was still numbed from the venom, his left side compromised. He adjusted his stance, leading with his right, bone armor thickening on that side. The fight moved through the hallway in 30 seconds of controlled violence, Tyrion relentless, creative, adapting every time Izuku closed the gap. The man wasn't just fast. He was tactical. He was testing, probing, learning the armor's coverage patterns, looking for joints and seams. He found one. A gap at Izuku's ribs, between the armor plates. The knife went in. It hit something harder than flesh. Izuku felt the impact, his internal structure had changed, the Grimm transformation extending further than surface level, but the blade caught and Tyrion was committed to the stab, leaving him extended and open. Izuku grabbed the knife hand, locked the wrist, and drove Tyrion face first into the wall. Tyrion hit hard enough to crack the plaster. He bounced off, spinning, and came back with the tail. Izuku caught it with his free hand, squeezed, felt the exoskeleton crunch. Tyrion screamed, part rage and part agony. "Stop," Izuku said. Tyrion stabbed at him with the remaining knife. Izuku caught the blade in his palm, it cut, it bled, the blood was darker than normal, almost black, and pushed it back. His grip on Tyrion's tail tightened. "Stop," he said again. Not to Tyrion. To himself. Because there was a part of him, the Grimm King part, the part that fed on aggression and dominance, that wanted to finish this. That wanted to end the threat completely, finally, with finality. He let go of the tail. Tyrion hit the floor, cradling his damaged hand and his crushed stinger. He looked up at Izuku with something new in his expression, not fear, exactly. Something more interesting. Confusion. He'd expected to be dead. "Why?" Tyrion said. "Because killing you doesn't fix what you're afraid of," Izuku said. "You're afraid Salem is choosing something she shouldn't. You're afraid of being replaced. And killing me won't fix that because the problem isn't me." Tyrion stared at him. "The problem," Izuku continued, "is that you love Salem and you don't know what to do with that love because she's never looked at you the way you want her to. And nothing I say or do changes that. Nothing you do to me changes that either." A door opened. RWBY stood in the doorway of Team RWBY's room, crescent rose in hand, silver eyes blazing. Behind her, Yang was already moving. Weiss had her rapier drawn. Blake had chains ready. "Izuku?" RWBY's voice was controlled despite her eyes being basically small silver suns. "What happened? We're done here." He didn't look away from Tyrion. "Go. Tell Salem you observed. Tell her she should come talk to me herself instead of sending proxies." Tyrion got up slowly. His tail hung wrong, damaged, not dead, but compromised. He looked at Izuku for a long moment with an expression that was trying to find the category for what had just happened and coming up empty. He left. The team converged on Izuku. RWBY went straight for his palm, the knife cut. "You're bleeding. It'll close." It already was, Grimm biology accelerating the process. The blood was darker than it should be. "How'd you know to be awake?" "I heard the hall lights. My semblance is petals, but my hearing is," she glanced at Blake's visible cat ears. "Enhanced." "Sorry." Loud fighting in a closed corridor. "I handled it." "You're bleeding," RWBY said again, like she hadn't heard him. He let her wrap his hand. She did it carefully, efficiently, using the basic first aid kit from her bedside table, and her silver eyes had dimmed back to their normal state, but they kept going to his face with an expression that he recognized but wasn't ready to name yet. "You should have called us," Yang said. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, and her voice was casual but her eyes were still red. It was contained. "He had a poison tail. I noticed." "You're impossible," Weiss said, but she sheathed her rapier as she said it, which meant the impossibility wasn't entirely unwelcome. Blake was looking at Tyrion's dent in the wall. "He'll come back." "Probably. But not tonight. And maybe not the same way next time." Izuku looked at the dent. "He said something interesting. He said Salem wants to observe me. Not control, not capture. Observe. Is that better?" RWBY asked. "Different. She's figuring out what I am. Same as I'm figuring out what she is." He looked at the wrapped hand. "She asked what I needed tonight. I asked what she needed. Nobody's done that for her in a long time." "You feel sorry for her," Blake said. "I think she was a person before she was a villain. I think that person is still in there, buried under centuries of grief and anger." He paused. "I think she's been alone so long she doesn't remember what it felt like not to be." The hallway was quiet. Outside, the beacon clock showed 4 in the morning. Students who'd slept through the fight remained asleep. The campus security team, alerted by the lights, was doing a sweep that would find nothing because Tyrion was already gone. RWBY stood up from his wrapped hand. She was close, closer than the first aid required. Her silver eyes were steady. "Stay," she said quietly. "Not a command. A request. In the hallway, I mean. Or," she glanced back at her room. "We have a couch. In the common area." "I don't, you should rest. Your hand needs to rest. It's already mostly healed." "Izuku." He looked at her. The request wasn't about the hand and both of them knew it. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He slept on the couch with Chip on his chest and RWBY in her doorway, checking on him twice before she finally went back to her bed. Yang gave him a look on her way past that communicated everything she wasn't saying. Weiss made tea and didn't comment on making a second cup. Blake put a book on the coffee table within his reach, open to a page she'd been reading, a passage about what it means to be between categories. Neither human nor monster. Neither enemy nor ally. Something else. He read until his eyes closed. Somewhere in the north, in her castle of black stone, Salem stood alone in her throne room and looked at the image her seer had brought back, Tyrion limping through the grim wastes toward home, tail compromised, and Izuku Midoriya letting him go. She had felt the fight through the grim network. Had felt the moment Izuku chose restraint. The question he'd asked her on the perimeter played in her memory. "What do you need, Salem?" She looked at her hands. The dark veins. The pale skin. The curse she'd worn so long it had become synonymous with herself. "Foolish boy," she said to the empty room. But she said it softly. Far above Remnant, the god of darkness stirred. The anomaly had displayed restraint under provocation, had chosen not to use lethal force against a target that would have been strategically advantageous to remove. That was unexpected. The god's essence, when it moved through violence, tended toward escalation. Through this boy, it appeared to be doing something else. He reached toward his brother. The anomaly continues to deviate from projection. It chooses mercy, the God of light observed. That is the God of light's domain, not yours. How is it channeling your essence toward mercy? Because my essence is being held by a soul that chooses differently than I would. A pause. Something that might have been interest. Fascinating. It's interfering with the experiment. Or it's improving it. The God of darkness turned his attention more fully on Remnant. On the sleeping boy on the couch. On the grim bird on his chest. On the girl who'd checked on him twice and the friends who'd made tea. Brother. When was the last time we were genuinely surprised? The God of light had no answer. We should go, the God of darkness said. Not yet. But soon. This needs to be resolved in person. Below, Cinder Fall stood on a rooftop in Vale and watched the lit window of Team RWBY's suite with eyes that were half maiden power and half ambition. She'd been watching the Grim King for 2 weeks. She'd watched Salem's visit. She'd watched the fight in the corridor through a carefully positioned scroll camera. She'd watched the bond forming between him and the Rose Girl and the Schnee Girl and the rest of them. And she'd seen his power. Really seen it. She flexed the hand that held the maiden's fire. Felt the warmth of stolen strength. She'd taken the Fall Maiden's power by parasitic contact, a grim dust glove designed to transfer aura and semblance through physical touch. The same device that had worked on the Fall Maiden would work on the Grim King. His power would be so much greater. Cinder smiled and went back to planning. In the library, Blake's open book sat on the coffee table. The passage she'd marked read, "The being between categories is not a contradiction. It is the resolution of one. The question is not what category it belongs to, but what it chooses to do with the freedom of belonging to none." Chip chirped in his sleep. Chapter 3, Sovereignty. The decision came to Izuku at 5 in the morning, standing on Beacon's roof in the cold, watching Vale wake up below him. He'd been turning it over for days. The space between Ozpin's careful manipulation and Salem's patient scheming was getting smaller. Ironwood had been back twice, more meetings, more assessments, more polite language around the core message of "we need to control you." Ozpin kept information in careful portions, feeding Izuku just enough to justify keeping him close without ever giving him enough to be genuinely independent. And Salem was circling, patient and ancient, waiting for the moment Izuku decided Ozpin wasn't worth the compromise. Neither of them was offering him a real choice. They were offering him better or worse versions of the same cage. Chip landed on his shoulder and chirped. "Yeah," Izuku said. "I know what I need to do." He'd been practicing with the Grimm for 2 weeks, not commanding them, the way he'd done instinctively at first, but communicating with them. Building something more like a working relationship than a master-servant hierarchy. Blake had been right about the framing. The Grimm weren't just weapons waiting to be aimed. They were incomplete beings that responded to genuine purpose the way plants responded to sunlight, not because they were programmed to, but because something in their fundamental nature was hungry for it. He'd given a pack of Beowulfs a territory to protect. An abandoned settlement in the foothills east of the Grimm Wastes, no people, no infrastructure, just a cluster of broken-down buildings that nobody had used in years. He'd told the Beowulfs, through the slow careful language of essence and intent, that this place was theirs to guard. Not to hunt from. To guard. 3 days later, the buildings still stood. And the Beowulfs were patrolling the perimeter in organized rotations, checking every structure at regular intervals, and, this was the part that had kept him awake, one of them had dragged fallen timber from the surrounding forest and propped it against a collapsed wall. Not sophistication. Not architecture. But not destruction either. They'd tried to repair it. He'd stood in the ruins of that settlement and felt something shift in his understanding of what he was. Not a monster. Not a hero in the traditional sense. Something that didn't have a name yet because it hadn't existed before. A builder who could speak to the things everyone else only knew how to fight. The territory he'd identified was a natural one, 300 square miles of terrain at the edge of the Grimm wastes, where the dark stone gave way to soil that could hold growth, where underground water sources ran close to the surface, where the existing cave systems could be repurposed into something that worked rather than something that just waited in the dark. Far enough from Vale that it wouldn't threaten civilian populations. Close enough that it could serve as a buffer between the Grimm wastes and inhabited land. The Grimm wouldn't just be tolerated there. They'd be part of the structure. Guards, workers, the living infrastructure of a place that didn't run on fear of them. He'd asked Blake to help him draft the announcement. She'd been awake all night working on it, cat ears fully forward and focused, crossing out words and replacing them with better ones. You can't call it a faction, she'd said at 2 a.m, surrounded by drafts. That sounds political. Military. Like you're declaring war. What would you call it? A community. A settlement. Something that implies permanence without implying aggression. New Haven, he'd said, and Blake had stared at him for a second before nodding. There's already a city called Haven in Mistral. I know. I figure the redundancy makes a point. Haven is supposed to mean safety. This one will actually provide it. Blake had smiled at that, the real one, not the polite one. New Haven. Now he stood on the roof with the dawn coming up gold over Vale and the decision already made, and the only thing left was telling people. RWBY first. Always RWBY first. She was awake when he knocked, she was always either deeply asleep or completely awake, no middle ground, sitting cross-legged on her bed with crescent rows partially disassembled across her lap, doing maintenance. She looked up when he opened the door and read his face immediately. You're leaving Beacon, she said. Not leaving. Building something else. He sat in her desk chair and laid it out, the territory, the Grimm, the plan, the reasoning. All of it. RWBY listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and he could see her processing behind those silver eyes. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. Ozpin's going to be furious, she said. Controlled fury. He doesn't do the uncontrolled kind. Ironwood's going to deploy. Probably. Salem's going to see it as some kind of move. Yes. And you're doing it anyway. Yes. RWBY set down the piece of crescent rose she'd been holding. When do we leave? Izuku blinked. RWBY, when? Do. We leave. You have Beacon. Your team. Your training, Izuku. She met his eyes and her voice was the quietest he'd ever heard it, which made it somehow the most serious. I found you in a forest 3 weeks ago and you asked if I was okay before you knew anything about me. I've watched you choose the harder right thing over the easier wrong one every single day since. I watched you let Tyrion go when killing him would have been justifiable. She picked up the piece of crescent rose and clicked it back into place. You're not leaving me behind. I won't let you. You'd leave Beacon for this. I'd go to the moon for this. Izuku looked at her. The morning light caught her hair, her eyes, the half-assembled weapon in her hands, and he felt something that had been building for 3 weeks finally stop pretending it was anything other than what it was. He didn't say it out loud yet. But he stopped pretending. Talk to your team first, he said. They deserve to choose. They'll come. Talk to them anyway. She did. He was in the common area eating cereal when they came out of the bedroom together, RWBY first, then Yang with her hair still in a messy braid and her arms crossed, then Blake already dressed, then Weiss last with an expression like someone who'd done complex math in their head and arrived at an answer they hadn't expected. So, Yang said. Wild plan. Grimm commune in the wasteland. Who's in? Nobody hesitated. Obviously I'm in, Yang said. RWBY's going and someone has to make sure she doesn't adopt every Grimm in 100 miles. You'd adopt them too, RWBY said. I'd try to box them, there's a difference. Yang looked at Izuku. What's the fighting situation like? Because if we're building something in Grimm territory, I want to know what kind of combat we're talking. Mixed. Grimm from outside our influence zone will test the borders constantly. Any human opposition will likely be organized and military grade. Yang's eyes lit up. Perfect. Blake was already at the bookshelf pulling things. I need 2 days to research the water table and underground system maps for your target area. There's historical survey data in the restricted section. I have a copy of the surveys, Izuku said. I've been planning this for a week. Blake stopped. Looked at him. Her ears did the forward tilting thing. You've been planning this for a week and you only told us this morning. I wanted to be sure before I asked anyone to follow me into the wilderness. You could have asked earlier. I know. I was being cautious. Don't be cautious about us. Her voice was quiet but direct. We're not variables you need to verify. We're people who've already decided. He didn't have an answer for that. Blake turned back to the bookshelf, cat ears still forward. Weiss was last. She stood a step back from the group, rapier hand resting on the hilt in its scabbard, not reaching for it, just grounding herself with the familiar weight. If I go with you, she said carefully, I'm breaking my family's official position. The Schnee Dust Company has a formal alliance with Atlas. Ironwood's response to New Haven will be Atlas's response, which means it becomes the Schnee Company's response. I know, Izuku said. That's why I'm not asking you to come. You're not asking any of us, Weiss said. You laid out the plan and let us decide. Which is either respectful or cowardly depending on perspective. A pause. It's respectful, for the record. She lifted her chin. I'm coming. Not because of politics and not because of the Schnee name. Because in 3 weeks you're the first person who has ever treated me like my judgment was worth something independent of my family's money. Your judgment is excellent, Izuku said. I know that. It's nice when other people know it too. She moved to stand with the group, shoulders set. Let's go build something. They told Glinda before they told Ozpin. Izuku made that choice deliberately. Glinda deserved honesty, and she'd been more honest with him than Ozpin had, even when her honesty was uncomfortable. She took it better than he expected and worse than he'd hoped. You're aware, she said, standing in her office with the riding crop held very still in her hands, that this will be perceived as a political declaration. Yes. That Ironwood will respond with force. Probably. That Salem may interpret it as an alliance offer. I'll deal with that directly. And Ozpin? Her voice shifted on his name. Barely. But Izuku caught it. What do you expect his response to be? Careful. Measured. Ultimately aimed at finding a way to leverage New Haven for his long-term agenda. Glinda was quiet for 3 seconds. You're not wrong. She set down the riding crop. He's not malicious. I want you to understand that. He's been fighting this war for longer than you can conceive of, and the methods he uses come from that length of time, not from cruelty. I believe you. And I still can't operate under those methods. No. She looked at him for a long moment. I'd like to come with you. Izuku blinked. There are things Ozpin hasn't told you that you'll need to know, Glinda said. About Salem's original nature. About the god's curse. About why she is what she is. A pause. I've been with Ozpin for 11 years. I've watched him make choices I agreed with and choices I didn't. Last week he removed historical documents from the library that you were specifically researching, and when I asked him why, he told me it was for your protection. Her jaw tightened. I am no longer satisfied with that explanation. Glinda. You don't have to do this. I'm aware. I'm choosing to. She picked up her riding crop, crossed to the window, looked out at the academy grounds. I've been here long enough. I'd like to see what you build. He told Ozpin in person. Alone, in the headmaster's office, early enough that the coffee hadn't been made yet, which meant Ozpin was at a genuine disadvantage because it turned out the man ran significantly better on caffeine. New Haven, Ozpin said, after Izuku laid it out. New Haven. In the borderland between the Grimm wastes and habitable land. Yes. With Grimm as your primary infrastructure and security force. With Grimm as partners. Not tools. Ozpin was quiet. He picked up his cane, set it down, picked it up again, a tell Izuku had learned to watch for. It meant Ozpin was running through his options and finding them more limited than he wanted. I should tell you, Ozpin said finally, that there is a precedent for what you're attempting. In the ancient records, the ones you were researching. A beat. The ones I removed from Blake's research stack. I know you removed them. Ozpin looked at him. She told you. No. I figured it out. Ozpin, I've been analyzing people and situations since I was a kid with no quirk and nothing but a notebook. You've been handling me like I might be manageable. I'm not. I can see that. Ozpin set the cane down finally. The precedent ended badly. The being who emerged from the pools in the ancient record tried to do what you're doing and was destroyed. By Salem. Because he was alone. Yes. In part. I'm not alone. Ozpin looked at him, really looked at him, past the assessment and the calculation, with something genuinely human in his expression. No. You're not. He stood, moving to the window with the practiced ease of a man who'd been using a cane for longer than most people lived. I'm not going to try to stop you, Izuku. I want you to know that. My methods are what they are, and I understand why they're insufficient for you. But I want you to have something before you go. He went to his desk, opened a drawer, and brought out a journal. Old, leather-bound, filled with cramped handwriting in multiple hands, generations of the same person, Izuku realized, writing in the same book as the previous version faded. Everything I know about Salem's original nature. The curse. The gods. The full history. He set it on the desk between them. No versions. No curated fragments. A pause. No more secrets. Not from you. Izuku picked up the journal. Looked at Ozpin. Why now? Because you asked what you needed instead of what you wanted, and it turns out those are the same thing. And because, Ozpin almost smiled. Glinda is going with you, which means I've run out of arguments. Izuku left Beacon 3 days later. He left with RWBY, Young, Blake, and Weiss. With Glinda, who arrived at the gate with 2 packed bags and a look that dared anyone to comment. With Chip on his shoulder and a Beowulf escort that joined them at the city edge, which caused significant disruption to morning traffic in Vale and would later appear in 3 separate news articles. He walked out carrying Ozpin's journal, 3 backpacks of supplies, and the weight of an idea that he wasn't sure would work. RWBY walked beside him and their hands bumped together and then, without either of them making a decision about it, weren't bumping anymore. They were holding. Young, on his other side, made a sound that was definitely not a squeal. Young, RWBY said. I said nothing. You squealed. I made no sound. Blake's cat ears were flat against her head in the way they went when she was trying not to smile. Weiss was looking pointedly in a different direction. Glinda's riding crop tapped against her palm at a rhythm that conveyed profound satisfaction. Izuku looked straight ahead and felt the territory that would be New Haven pulling at his awareness like a compass point. The Grimm in that region were already different. 3 weeks of careful communication had begun to change their behavior. The Beowulfs that patrolled the abandoned settlement were organized. Purposive. They didn't scatter when he reached out to them now, they answered. He was going to build something real. The territory took 2 days to reach on foot and by transport. The borderland looked like the end of the world from the outside, dark stone giving way to sparse soil, the Grimm Waste's influence still heavy in the air, the sky slightly darker than it was over Vale, no settlements for 40 miles in any direction. From the inside, Izuku saw what he'd been sensing for weeks. The cave systems ran deep and wide, their chambers large enough to be livable with modification. Underground water sources that could be surface channeled. Soil at the border edge that was nutritionally poor but not dead, it could hold growth with work. The geography naturally created defensible positions along the northern and eastern approaches. "It's grim," Yang said, looking around at the dark stone and sparse vegetation. "Yes," Izuku said. "I meant that as a pun, but actually it's literally, yeah, this is grim." "It's workable," Weiss said, and her voice had the quality it got when she was already designing the solution. "The cave system alone is a significant structural advantage. The water access means we can sustain a population without external supply. The northern approach has natural elevation advantages for defense." She looked at Izuku. "The soil chemistry is manageable if you can redirect the underground runoff slightly. There's a mineral deposit about 2 miles east, I saw it on the survey maps. Wrong mineral for dust, but right mineral for agriculture." "You're doing the supply chain thing," Yang said fondly. "Someone has to." Blake was already in the cave entrance. Scroll out, mapping the first chamber. The main cavern is 40 meters across, 8 meters high. Structurally sound. With lighting it could serve as a community space. She looked up. "Grimm made these tunnels over thousands of years," Izuku said. "They build when given purpose. They just haven't had purpose before." "Show me," Blake said. And the way she said it wasn't a challenge. It was anticipation. Izuku closed his eyes. He reached out across the essence network, feeling the Grimm that had already gathered at the edges of the territory, drawn by his presence, waiting, attentive in a way that wild Grimm never were. He found the Beowulfs that had been guarding the abandoned settlement. The Ursai in the cave systems. The creeps that had been his scouts, mapping the underground for 3 weeks. And he gave them something different than a command. He gave them a vision. Not words, not instructions, the Grimm didn't process language. He gave them the feeling of purpose. The warmth of building rather than breaking. The image, felt rather than seen, of this territory filled and whole and protected. Himself at the center of it, not as a king on a throne, but as the person holding everything together. The response came back like a wave. Every Grimm in the territory oriented toward him simultaneously. Not in aggression. Not in submission. In engagement, in the kind of active readiness that he'd seen in Beacon students before a project they actually cared about. The Ursai in the cave system started moving. Not randomly. With direction, pulling stone from loose formations, clearing the main chamber floor, stacking debris in load-bearing configurations that Izuku hadn't shown them but that came from some deep structural instinct he hadn't known they had. Beowulfs arrived at the surface and began clearing vegetation from areas that Weiss had mentally mapped as building sites, pulling up root systems and depositing them in piles that Izuku realized, with a start, could be composted into soil amendment. Chip flew off his shoulder and began directing traffic between Grimm groups, chirping orders with more authority than a creature his size should have had, coordinating between the cave team and the surface team, and Izuku felt a surge of something so warm it made his chest ache. His bird. His weird, nest-building, bacon-stealing, shoulder-perching bird was project managing a Grimm construction crew. "Oh my God," RWBY said softly. She was standing beside him with her hands over her mouth, watching a Beowulf the size of a car carefully move a stone block into position in a way that suggested genuine structural awareness. "Izuku. They're building." "Yeah. They're cooperating. Look at them." Yang had gone completely quiet, which for Yang was more remarkable than anything the Grimm were doing. She was watching an Ursa use its massive forelimbs to smooth the cave floor, and her expression had the quality of someone who is rapidly recategorizing something fundamental. "I owe a lot of Grimm an apology," she said finally. "You were working with the information you had," Izuku said. "I killed them. So did I, in the beginning. Before I understood." He paused. We figure it out. Then we do better. Yang looked at him for a moment. Then she punched his shoulder lightly, the Yang version of deep emotional communication. He punched back. She smiled. The first week of New Haven was chaos, momentum, and more construction than Izuku had thought possible. The Grimm worked with extraordinary efficiency once given genuine purpose. The main cavern became a functional common area in 4 days, carved and smoothed and lit by dust crystals that Weiss sourced from the SDC convoy she'd negotiated credit from before leaving. Cave chambers branched off the main space in all directions, each one assessed and designated by the team: living quarters, storage, a working space for Glinda's educational program, a training area where Blake began running combat sessions. On the surface, the Beowulfs had cleared 3 acres of borderland soil and the Grimm structural work was beginning to show shapes, not buildings yet, but foundations. The bones of something. RWBY was everywhere. That was the only way to describe it. She was in the caves and on the surface and in the training area and in the kitchen space they'd set up, her semblance carrying her between tasks in rose-petal bursts that left trails of red throughout New Haven like a living signature. She kept up a running commentary that was half plans and half enthusiasm, and the Grimm around her responded to it, not the words, but the emotional frequency of her. Positive emotion, Izuku realized. The Grimm that had been drawn to negative emotion their whole existence were now being drawn to RWBY's positive frequency, and it was affecting their behavior. They like her, Blake said, watching a Beowulf follow RWBY across the common area at a respectful distance, tail low and not aggressive. She's the first truly positive emotional presence they've been near without trying to destroy, Izuku said. They don't know what to do with it except stay close to it. Like people, Blake said. Like people. That night, after the first full day of real productive work, after a dinner that Weiss had somehow made reasonable from their supplies and a planning session that ran past midnight, Izuku sat outside on the borderland stone looking at the broken moon. RWBY found him there, which had become a pattern he'd stopped pretending to be surprised by. She sat down close. Close enough that their shoulders touched, and neither of them moved away. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. Are you happy? Right now, tonight, whatever, are you actually happy?" He thought about it genuinely. Something close to it. Getting closer. What's the distance? Missing home. Not knowing if I can get back. The constant background noise of everyone wanting something from me. He looked at the broken moon. None of those are new. And against all of them there's this. He gestured at the caves behind them, the surface work visible in the dust light, the Grimm patrolling the perimeter in purposive rotations. This is something I made. Not something I inherited or absorbed or accidentally became. I decided on this and I built it and it's real. RWBY leaned her head against his shoulder. You made it. We helped. But you made it. You helped a lot. That's what I'm here for. She paused. Izuku. I like you. I've liked you since the forest, which was immediately, which I know sounds, RWBY. I know it's fast and everything is complicated and you might go home someday and, RWBY. She stopped. He turned to look at her. This close, her silver eyes were remarkable, not glowing, not flickering, just present and warm and entirely honest, because RWBY Rose was incapable of being anything other than honest. I like you too, he said. I've liked you since you asked if I was okay when I was standing in a field of Grimm looking like the monster under everyone's bed. RWBY's expression did several things in quick succession. That was one question. It was the right one. I ask a lot of wrong questions. You ask a lot of questions. Most of them are right. She laughed, the full one, the gut-deep one that he'd been collecting since the first day. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, which was simple and direct and entirely RWBY, and the Grimm essence in him resonated with something that it had no language for because this was categorically outside its original parameters. Building instead of breaking. Creating instead of destroying. feeling something other than hunger. He kissed her back and the borderland was quiet around them, and Chip, sitting on a nearby rock, chirped once with the satisfaction of someone who'd seen this coming for weeks. The second week brought people. Not many at first. Word had spread in Vale, the way word always spread, through rumor and network and the 3 news articles about the Beowulf escort. A Faunus family whose settlement had been burned in a Grimm attack. 2 retired huntsmen who'd heard about the Grimm command situation and wanted to see it for themselves. A young huntress named Cleo who'd failed her certification exam twice, not because she lacked skill but because the testing system was rigidly structured in ways that didn't account for non-standard fighting styles. Then, through Blake's white fang contacts, carefully maintained, stripped of the violent faction, a larger group. 20 Faunus who'd been displaced from their homes in Lower Vale by a combination of SDC policy and kingdom zoning regulations. They arrived on a Tuesday morning, cautious and quiet, and stopped at the border of New Haven's established perimeter where a Beowulf was sitting on a rock. The Beowulf looked at them. They looked at the Beowulf. The Beowulf yawned, showing a mouth full of teeth, and lay down in the sun with its chin on its paws. A Faunus girl, maybe 8 years old, rabbit ears, clearly braver than everyone twice her age, walked up to the Beowulf and put her hand on its head. The Beowulf's ear twitched. "It's warm," the girl reported to the adults behind her. After that, people stopped treating the Grimm like a threat to manage and started treating them like a feature of the environment. It happened faster than Izuku expected. People adapted when the alternative was fear, and fear was exhausting. Pyrrha arrived on a Wednesday. She came alone, which surprised him. No team, no escort, just Pyrrha Nikos with Milo and Akuo in their transport configuration and a look on her face that he'd learned to recognize, not in her, but in himself, back in the days before UA when people called him Deku and he walked the halls of his school like the floor could give out at any moment. The look of someone who'd been defined by their reputation for so long they'd forgotten what they wanted underneath it. "You're the invincible girl," Izuku said, when she introduced herself. Pyrrha's expression flickered. "That's what they call me." "What do you call yourself?" She blinked. "Pyrrha." "Nice to meet you, Pyrrha. I'm Izuku. I'm the Grimm King, apparently, though I'm trying to make the title mean something other than what it sounds like. I heard about what you're building here." She looked around New Haven, the caves, the surface construction, the Grimm going about purposive business, the mix of people integrating with unlikely smoothness. "I came because I wanted to see if it was real." "Is it?" "More real than anything I've seen in 4 years of tournament circuits and beacon evaluation and being Pyrrha Nikos, champion of Mistral." She said the title the way people said the name of a city they'd left behind. "Can I stay?" "As long as you want." She exhaled like something had been holding her ribcage tightly and finally let go. "Thank you." Pyrrha Nikos integrated into New Haven's life with a quietness that was almost startling given her reputation. She trained with Blake in the combat space, seriously, without showing off, exploring her own abilities outside the performance context she'd operated in for years. She talked with Izuku about strategy in the evenings, both of them bent over maps of the surrounding territory with the focused energy of 2 people who thought about combat the same way, from first principles outward. "You carry it differently than I expected," she told him one evening. "Carry what?" "The power. The authority." She gestured at the Grimm visible beyond the cave entrance. "Everyone expects the Grimm King to be, I don't know. Imperious. Demanding. You're just, you. The power doesn't change what I want," Izuku said. "It just changes what I can do about it." Pyrrha considered that. "I've had power my whole life. Semblance that makes me nearly unbeatable, physical ability that puts me above most opponents, reputation that precedes me into every room I enter. And for years I've felt like the power was happening to me rather than being something I chose." She paused. "How do you make it feel like a choice?" "You decide what it's for," he said. "Every time. Not once and permanently, every time you use it, you decide what it's for." Pyrrha looked at him for a long moment. That's very simple. Most good answers are. She smiled. And underneath the smile, something relaxed that he suspected hadn't relaxed since she was old enough to hold a weapon. I think I'll stay a while, she said. Winter came on a Friday. She arrived not with a military transport but in civilian clothes, still rigid, still precise, but stripped of the Atlas insignia that had been the visual shorthand of her authority for years. She carried 2 bags and her swords and the expression of someone who'd made a decision at significant personal cost and wasn't going to pretend it hadn't cost anything. Izuku met her at the perimeter. Behind him, a Beowulf sat attentively. I filed my resignation this morning, Winter said, without preamble. I know. Ironwood sent me a very formal message about it. What did it say? It said your resignation was accepted and that my responsibility for your choices was noted in my file. I don't have a file. I do now, apparently. Winter looked at the Beowulf. The Beowulf looked back. Will it, he won't bother you. His name is 7. You named them. Some of them have been around long enough to distinguish themselves. It seemed right. Winter's composure held, but something behind it shifted. I made the decision because Ironwood gave me an order I couldn't execute. His new directive classified New Haven as a hostile territory and authorized military response. The first stage was reconnaissance, acceptable. The second stage was targeted asset elimination. A pause. The assets were your team. Izuku went still. He argued it preventively, Winter continued, voice flat. Before New Haven reached sufficient scale to be unmanageable. He's not wrong about the strategic logic. He's entirely wrong about the morality. She met his eyes directly. I couldn't execute that order. And I couldn't stay in a structure that gave it. You gave up everything. I gave up an institution that was moving in a direction I couldn't follow. Her jaw tightened. Don't make it sound noble. I had no good options. This is the least bad one. Okay, Izuku said. He stepped aside. Welcome to New Haven. 7 stood, stretched, and walked over to Winter. He was taller than her at shoulder height. He sniffed her hand carefully and then, slowly, with the deliberateness of a creature that had learned to be deliberate, pressed his skull against her palm. Winter went completely still. He's accepting you, Izuku said quietly. Winter's free hand came up and rested, very carefully, on top of 7's bone-plated head. It's warm, she said, echoing the rabbit-eared girl from Tuesday without knowing it. Yes, Izuku said. Winter stood there for a moment with her hand on a Grimm's head and her resignation filed that morning and her entire career structure dismantled, and she breathed out slowly. I'll need a role here. Something structured. I can't function without structure. I was thinking perimeter security command. The Border Patrol Grimm need a coordinator who understands military formation tactics. You're the most qualified person I know for that. Winter blinked. You want me to command Grimm soldiers? I want you to work with Grimm soldiers. The command part is shared. She looked at 7. 7 looked back with calm red eyes. Fine, she said. But I'm establishing protocol. Written protocol. Please do. Her relationship with Izuku built in the way structural things built, slowly, load-bearingly, one reliable piece at a time. She wasn't Yang, who engaged directly and on fire. She wasn't RWBY, who led with her heart. She wasn't Blake, who connected through shared ideas. Winter connected through demonstrated reliability, through showing up and doing the thing and doing it with excellence, and Izuku met that with consistent respect that never demanded she be anything other than exactly what she was. The first time she laughed genuinely in his presence, really laughed, not the controlled social response, was during a training exercise where 7 sat on an Atlas training drone and refused to move while Winter attempted to maintain military dignity and Izuku stood to the side making increasingly unsuccessful attempts to reason with the Beowulf. 7, Izuku said. Off. Seven's ears swiveled. 7. The drone needs to, 7, get off the drone. I'm serious. This is, 7. 7 yawned. Winter's composure cracked. The laugh that came out of her was startled and genuine and completely unguarded, and when she registered what she was doing she brought her hand up to cover her mouth, and Izuku looked at her and smiled, and she looked away with both ears pink. After that, the distance between them closed by degrees. Salem arrived on a Tuesday night, 2 weeks after New Haven's founding, and she came alone. No Grimm escort, she didn't need one, and Izuku suspected she knew that bringing Grimm into his territory would be a provocation he wouldn't tolerate. She walked across the borderland in the dark and every Grimm in New Haven oriented toward her and then, following Izuku's standing instruction, held position. He met her outside, alone. You built it, she said, looking at the cave entrance, the surface structures, the lit interior visible through the opening. We built it. It took a lot of people. You built it with Grimm. Something in her voice that wasn't quite awe, closer to recognition. The text said it couldn't be done. The text said I couldn't survive the pools either. Salem turned to look at him. She was dressed differently than the first time, less theatrical, less armor. Still imposing, still ancient, but something in how she held herself was different. The encounter at Beacon's perimeter had done something. His question had done something. I've been thinking, she said, about what you asked me. What you need? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not accustomed to honest answers to that question. I've given manipulative ones for so long that I'm not certain I have honest access to the genuine one. What's your best attempt? Salem looked at the broken moon. I want it to stop, she said quietly. The war. The cycle. Ozma dying and reincarnating, me sending forces against the academies, the Grimm, the hunts, all of it. I've been fighting so long that I've forgotten what I was fighting for at the beginning. At the beginning it was grief. And love. And anger at gods who played with human lives like pieces on a board. Her hands were at her sides, and they were still. The stillness of someone who'd stopped performing. Now it's just, inertia. The war continues because stopping it would require knowing what comes after, and I've been so long in the war that I can't imagine the after. Izuku looked at her. That's an honest answer. It frightened me. The honesty. It usually does. She turned to him. The red gold eyes were searching. You're not afraid of me. Not really. I'm cautious. Respectful of what you're capable of. But afraid, no. Why not? Because you asked what I needed before you asked for anything from me. People who are only dangerous don't do that. Salem was quiet for a long moment. I was human once, she said. Before the gods. Before the curse. I remember it less clearly every century. But I remember that it was, simpler. Smaller. Good in ways that didn't require strategy. You're still human, Izuku said. Underneath all of it. The curse changed your body and extended your life and filled you with the god of darkness's essence, but you still have a soul. I can feel it. You can feel, through the Grimm connection. You and I are linked through the pools. I've been able to feel you since the day I arrived. He paused. You've been able to feel me too. You knew I was at Beacon before the seer showed you. Salem didn't deny it. Yes. That's why you came personally. Not because you couldn't send someone else. Because you wanted to see for yourself. Yes. She looked at him with something that was completely unguarded in a way he suspected she'd forgotten how to be. What do you see? When you feel me through the connection? Loneliness, he said immediately. Old, absolute loneliness. And under it, something that was warm once and has been waiting to be warm again for so long it stopped expecting to. He met her ancient eyes. You're not evil, Salem. You're exhausted and you've been alone for millennia and the people you loved died before you could make it right. That's not evil. That's tragedy. Salem turned away. For a moment she was entirely still, statue still, the way immortals went still when they were feeling something they hadn't felt in too long to process quickly. Don't, she said, and her voice cracked on the word. Just the one. Just for a second. Don't what? Don't be kind to me. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything with it, Izuku said. Just, stay. See what we're building. Talk to me. That's all I'm asking. She stood with her back to him for another long moment. Then she turned around, and her expression was the most human he'd seen it, stripped of the ancient mask, just a woman who had been hurt in ways that had metastasized into centuries of war. Tyrion, she said. I know what he did. I didn't order it. I know. He acts on his own when he feels threatened by anything that occupies my attention. I know that too. He loves you. In his way. She closed her eyes briefly. He's loyal. And I've used that loyalty in ways I'm not. She stopped. I don't apologize. I haven't needed to, in a very long time. You don't have to apologize to me, Izuku said. But you might want to figure out what you want to do about him. Because he'll come back, and the next time I can't promise I'll be able to stop him before someone gets hurt. Salem nodded. He'll be managed. Managed, or talked to. She looked at him sharply. He's not just a resource, Izuku said. He's a person. Messed up and dangerous, but a person. If you treat him like a tool, he'll keep acting like a weapon. Salem stared at him. You told me not to come here because you'd weaponized yourself. You let me walk into your territory. You asked what I needed. And now she stopped. Shook her head slowly. You are the strangest being I have encountered in 4,000 years. I've been told I'm weird. Not weird. She considered. Unprecedented. She stayed for 3 hours. They walked New Haven's perimeter and Izuku showed her the Grimm at work, the building, the patrols, the purposive behavior, and Salem watched with an expression that moved through several stages, ending somewhere between wonder and something she didn't name. She asked questions, and they were good questions, and he answered them honestly. When she left, she paused at the border. I'll come back. You're welcome to. Ozpin won't like it. Ozpin doesn't have a vote here. She almost smiled. The almost was more significant than a full smile would have been, given how long she'd gone without one. No. I suppose he doesn't. She walked into the darkness and was gone, and Izuku stood at the border for a moment before Seven trotted up beside him and shoved his massive skull under Izuku's hand. Yeah, Izuku said, scratching behind Seven's ear. I know. Give it time. Cinder moved on a Thursday. He felt her coming but not as a threat, as a familiar energy signature, the Fall Maiden's power radiating heat that registered on his grim senses as fire adjacent, nothing specific. She was skilled enough to suppress her emotional signature, which meant she'd been studying his detection methods. She appeared in New Haven's main cavern at midnight when most people were asleep. The cavern was lit by dust crystals, warm and amber, casting long shadows from the stalagmites at the edges. She wore a mask and dark clothing and her half-maiden eye glowed amber. Izuku was waiting. Sitting on a stone in the center of the cavern, apparently alone. I know you're there, he said. Cinder stepped from the shadow. She hadn't expected that but she didn't flinch, she was too controlled for surprise. The Grimm senses, she said. You can feel heat. Among other things. What do you want, Cinder? Her eyes narrowed. You know who I am. I've been expecting you. You've been watching New Haven for 2 weeks. You were at Beacon before that. You move carefully and you're patient. He looked at her steadily. You also have stolen power that you're using to sustain yourself, and it's not sitting right in you. The Fall Maiden's fire doesn't belong to you and your aura is working overtime to integrate it. Cinder went very still. You can sense that. I can sense the conflict in your aura. It's like a joint out of socket. It fits but it pulls. He paused. That must hurt. It doesn't matter. It clearly does. What I came for, Cinder said, and her voice was controlled and hard, is what you have. The Grim King's power. You came out of the pools carrying the God of Darkness's authority in your body. It can be transferred. She raised her hand, and the Grim Dust glove was visible, the same device she'd used on the Fall Maiden. I've studied the mechanism. Aura transfer via parasitic contact. Your aura present with Grim essence integrated. The glove will take both. You think it'll work the way it worked on the Maiden? Yes. Then you haven't thought carefully enough about what my Grim essence actually is. He stood up. The Fall Maiden had a specific quantum of power, bounded, integrated, transferable. What I carry is, he searched for the right frame. It's not a battery. It's a structure. The pools didn't give me a charge. They remade my entire physiology around the power. You'd be trying to transfer the architecture of a building through a pipe. Cinder's eyes flickered. He could see her recalculating. You'll try anyway, he said. It wasn't a question. She moved fast, faster than he'd expected, the Maiden's fire giving her speed and raw aura mass that made her movements explosive. The glove hand came for his arm, and she was good enough that she almost made contact. Almost. Izuku caught her wrist. Not the glove hand, the other one, crossing her body in a movement that locked her arm and forced her off balance. She fired a burst of maiden fire at point blank and it hit his chest and burned. It burned more than it should have. More than the bullets, more than Tyrion's venom, more than anything since the pools themselves. Maiden fire was the god of light's power, the god of darkness's counterpart, and inside him those two forces collided and for a moment everything went white and dark simultaneously. But he held her. Cinder wrenched free, turned, and drove the glove into his forearm. The effect was instant and catastrophic for her. Izuku felt the transfer mechanism activate, felt it reaching into him, pulling, grasping for the Grim essence that was woven through his every cell, every bone, every nerve. And instead of a clean transfer, it found an ocean. The mechanism, designed for contained, bounded power, was suddenly attached to something vast and total and structural, and it pulled. Cinder screamed. The glove lit up. Not with the Grim essence it was trying to take, with feedback. The mechanism was reversing, pouring the vacuum back into her, and dragging with it the Fall Maiden's fire because the two were now connected through the failed transfer. The Maiden power, stolen, uncomfortable, always slightly wrong in her, began to unravel. Izuku grabbed the glove with his free hand and pulled it off her with brute force, breaking the transfer mid-process. The severed connection snapped through both of them, he staggered, she collapsed. Cinder lay on the cavern floor. The amber light in her eye was gone. The fire heat of the Fall Maiden's power that he'd been sensing for weeks was gone. She was breathing, fast, shallow, frightened in a way she didn't know how to look, and when she raised her hands they were ordinary hands. No maiden fire. No stolen semblance. Just her. Just Cinder Fall, a girl who had wanted power so badly she'd reached for things that didn't belong to her, and now had nothing. She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between devastated and waiting. Waiting for the punishment that power always delivered to those who'd overreached. Are you hurt? Izuku asked. Cinder blinked. What? Are you hurt? The feedback would have hit your aura hard, if your reserves were already compromised from carrying mismatched maiden power, the backlash could have caused internal damage. She stared at him. I just tried to steal from you. Yes. Are you hurt? Why do you? She stopped. Her hands dropped to her sides. The devastated part of her expression was winning over the waiting part. I've lost everything I had. The maiden power wasn't yours to have. Losing it isn't losing what you actually had. What did I actually have? I don't know yet, Izuku said. That's worth finding out. The silence in the cavern stretched. From outside came the sound of New Haven at night, the Grimm patrols, the distant murmur of the underground water, the settling of stone that was slowly being shaped into something deliberate. You're not going to punish me, Cinder said. It wasn't a question, she was categorizing, filing, trying to understand a response that didn't fit her framework. No. Or imprison me. No. Or send me back to Salem. That's your choice, not mine. He extended his hand, not the burned arm, the other one. New Haven doesn't turn people away. That's the whole point. Cinder looked at his hand for a long time. She'd been calculating people her entire life, reading the angle, finding the exploit, moving toward power and away from vulnerability. She was trying to find the angle now and coming up empty, because there wasn't one. The offer was what it looked like. She took his hand. He helped her up. I don't trust this, she said. That's fair. I don't fully trust you either. But trust builds or it doesn't, and it starts with someone deciding to try. She said nothing. But she stayed. The gods came on a Saturday. Izuku felt it first, not through the Grimm network, but through something deeper, something that had been dormant since the pools. The original source. The fundamental current that ran under all Grimm essence, that the pools drew from, that Salem was cursed with. Something vast moving toward remnant with intent. He was in the main cavern when it hit. He stood up from the planning table, scattering Weiss's maps, and everyone in the cavern felt the atmospheric shift. The dust crystals flickered. The Grimm throughout New Haven went completely still, not Izuku's command, instinct. Ancient, deep instinct. Something's coming, Blake said, on her feet. Something big, Yang confirmed, eyes already red. Pyrrha had Milo in hand. Winter's swords were drawn. Glinda's riding crop was up. RWBY was at Izuku's side in a rose petal burst before he'd taken a step. Stay here, he said. Not happening, RWBY said. It's the gods. The brother gods. There, then you definitely shouldn't be alone. She met his eyes and her silver ones were steady and serious and he knew with absolute certainty that nothing he said would make her stay inside. He loved her for it and was terrified by it simultaneously. Everyone, he said, raising his voice. With me. Stay behind me until I know what they want. He walked out of New Haven into the borderland, and the sky was wrong. Not dark, brighter. A light that came from no sun, from no moon, from no dust crystal, but from the air itself. Directly overhead, two presences were descending through the atmosphere in a way that wasn't physical in any conventional sense. They didn't come in bodies. They came in themselves, pure essence, barely clothed in visible form, so vast that their edges blurred at the horizon. The god of light was luminous. Golden white, radiant, warmth that was simultaneously comforting and burning. His form, when it resolved, was tall and broad and ancient in a way that made every human concept of age seem like a rough draft. The god of darkness was the opposite, not dark in the way Grimm were dark, not the pooled blackness of the waste. He was the dark of deep space, of water at depth, of places that existed before light arrived. His form was fluid, changing, the edges of him constantly in motion. They stood on the borderland stone and looked at Izuku, and the attention of both gods simultaneously was the most pressure Izuku had ever felt in two bodies. Not threatening exactly, overwhelming. Like standing in front of the sun too long. Behind him, he could feel his people. RWBY's hand brushed his shoulder and stayed there. Yang on his left. Blake's quiet presence, steady and sharp. Weiss, rigid with controlled fear and absolute refusal to back down. Pyrrha, Milo raised and ready. Winter, swords crossed in front of her in a defensive posture that was muscle memory from a lifetime of training. Glinda, riding crop up. And further back, just arrived, Salem. He felt her before he saw her, the essence of her reaching across the borderland as she walked into view at the edge of the clearing. She stopped beside Izuku. Not behind him. Beside him. The god of light looked at her with an expression that was too alien to read as human emotion, but registered as something in the category of disappointment. You, he said. Yes, Salem said. Me. The god of light looked at Izuku. And you. The anomaly. My name is Izuku Midoriya, Izuku said. Not the anomaly. Your name is a detail. What you are is the matter of this meeting. The god of light's voice resonated not just in the air but in Izuku's bones, in the Grimm essence, in the deepest structure of his rebuilt physiology. You carry the essence of my brother in a vessel that was not designed for it. You have created a community that integrates Grimm, creatures of destruction, into a living civilization. You have altered the fundamental behavior of entities created solely to destroy. A pause. You have made a mockery of the system. I've made an improvement to the system, Izuku said. The god of light went very still. Your system, Izuku continued, was light versus dark. Creation versus destruction. Humanity blessed with souls and purpose, Grimm condemned to function as a reset mechanism for when humanity failed. You built a binary and you called it a world. He felt the pressure of divine attention increase and stood into it. The problem with a binary is that it can't accommodate synthesis. It can't account for the possibility that destruction, given soul connection, might build. That Grimm, given purpose, might protect. That a human from outside your system, remade by your brother's pools, might choose neither side of your war and make something new. You speak of the divine design as if it were a policy document, the god of light said, and there was something in his tone that was the cosmic equivalent of someone discovering their work has been critiqued. It is a policy document. It's just a very old one. Izuku looked at the god of darkness. You made the Grimm incomplete. No souls, no interiority, pure function. That was your design. But I think you knew it was wrong, even when you did it. Because everything you put in the pools that reacted to me, the capacity for purpose, for response, for something beyond destruction, that was already there. You built it in and walked away. The god of darkness said nothing. But his fluid form stilled. Brother, he said eventually. This is not your matter, the god of light said. It concerns my essence, the god of darkness said. It concerns my design. I will speak. He turned his full attention to Izuku, and it landed differently than the god of light's attention, not judgment, something closer to recognition. You said I built capacity for purpose into the pools and walked away. How do you know this? Because I can feel it, Izuku said. In every Grimm I've communicated with, there's a space where purpose can live. It was never filled because you designed the pools to create Grimm without souls, so the space was always empty. I'm not giving them my soul, I'm giving them access to connection, which creates enough interiority to fill the space you left. You're saying, the god of darkness said slowly, that the design was incomplete. Not wrong. Incomplete. Yes. And that you are the completion. I'm one completion. Not the only possible one. Just the first one who ended up in the pools while still being a person. The god of light's radiance intensified. This is sophistry designed to justify an abomination. The experiment requires clear categories. Light, dark. Human, Grimm. Creator, destroyer. You collapse these categories and the experiment cannot, the experiment is failing, Salem said. Everyone looked at her. The experiment, she said, voice steady, addressed directly to the god of light, has been running for 4,000 years and it has produced exactly what you designed it to produce. Cycles. Grimm attacks. Human progress, human failure, reset, repeat. Thousands of years of the same pattern, and what has it achieved? Her red gold eyes held the god of light's radiance without flinching. You gave humanity free will and then you built a system that punishes them for using it incorrectly, with the definition of incorrect being entirely yours. If the experiment's purpose is to determine whether humanity deserves your love, she said it with weight, the love that had been promised and withheld, then the answer, by your own framework, will always be no. Because you built the standard to be unachievable. You, the god of light said, are not a neutral voice in this. She's right, Izuku said. The god of light turned to him. She's been inside the system longer than any human. She's the primary mechanism by which the experiment resets. And she's telling you the experiment doesn't work. He stepped forward. One step, just enough to close the distance. I'm not from this world. I don't have a side in your war. I don't owe loyalty to your design. And from outside, what I see is two gods who created a world, set it an impossible standard, and have been watching it fail for millennia and calling the failure the point. The point, the god of light said, dangerously quiet, is judgment. Humanity's fitness to receive the gift of, then judge by this. Izuku gestured at New Haven behind him. Humans and Faunus and Grimm, coexisting. People choosing to build rather than waiting to be protected. A woman who's been your primary antagonist for 4,000 years standing beside us because someone was kind to her instead of afraid. He met the god of light's luminous gaze. If humanity's fitness is determined by capacity for growth, by the ability to synthesize, to build, to extend the hand even when it's easier to close it, then New Haven is your evidence. Judge it. The silence that followed was absolute. The Grimm throughout New Haven were motionless. The borderland stone was still. The god of light looked at New Haven. At the Grimm patrols moving in organized purpose. At the mixed community visible through the cave entrance. At the people standing behind Izuku, afraid but present, weapons ready but not raised. At Salem, standing without her army, beside the thing she'd spent millennia treating as the enemy. At Cinder, who'd failed in her worst impulse and been offered a hand anyway. At RWBY, whose silver eyes, the god of light's own gift to her bloodline, were steady and warm and aimed at Izuku like a compass. Brother, the god of darkness said again. I know, the god of light said. He said it quietly. The divine edge had left his voice. What remained was, something older. Something that had been there before the gods had decided to be gods. Uncertainty. Your world, the god of darkness said to Izuku, where you came from. Do they have this? The synthesis? They're working toward it. Some of them. With different problems but the same fundamental choice. Izuku thought of All Might. Of Aizawa. Of Uraraka and Ida and Todoroki. The work isn't finished there either. It's never finished. That's not a flaw. That's what it means to be alive. The god of darkness turned to his brother. Something passed between them, wordless, old, the communication of entities who had existed before language and found words imprecise. The experiment, the god of light said finally, is not concluded. His tone had shifted. The judgment was still there, but it had moved, from verdict to consideration. We will, observe further. Without intervention. And Salem's curse? Izuku asked. He felt Salem go very still beside him. The god of light looked at her. She was condemned for her actions. The condemnation stands. The condemnation, Izuku said carefully, was infinite punishment for finite crimes, administered by entities with absolute power over a single human being. That's not justice. That's an example. It was, the god of light started. Grief, Salem said. Her voice was barely above quiet. I was grieving. I broke myself against the relics trying to reach someone I loved, and you punished me for it. She looked at the god of light directly, and for the first time in 4,000 years there was no war-weary hatred in her expression. Just honesty, raw and exhausting and long overdue. I was wrong. I've been wrong for centuries. I know that. But you were wrong too. Not equally. What I've done is, she stopped. Steadied. What I've done is not comparable. But you were not just. The god of light was quiet for a very long time. The curse cannot be undone, he said at last. The nature of immortality, once given, cannot be retracted. A pause that stretched long enough for the dust crystals inside New Haven to flicker. But its conditions can be modified. Suffering for its own sake serves no purpose. He looked at Salem and then, for the first time, looked away. The luminosity in the air decreased slightly, not gone, but reduced to something that didn't burn. The full weight of it. The inability to die, the disconnection from others, those were the specific punishments. They don't need to remain total. Salem said nothing. Izuku could feel her through the essence link, something vast and frozen beginning, very carefully, very cautiously, to thaw. We're leaving, the god of darkness said. He looked at Izuku one last time, and in his fluid, starless form something moved that might have been satisfaction. You have my essence. Use it well. I've been trying to. I know. The fluid form drifted closer, and for a moment the god of darkness was inches from Izuku, and his attention was not judgment but something that a human might call pride in the complicated way of someone who'd made something they didn't understand and then watched it exceed the design. The pools were my refuse. You made them into something else. You left the capacity there. Yes. I did. A pause. Interesting, that. They left the way they'd arrived, not physical departure, not movement, but a withdrawal of presence that happened in an instant and left the borderland exactly as it had been before. Stone and sparse vegetation and the dark of a normal remnant night, the broken moon looking down, no divine light, no impossible radiance. Just New Haven. Just people. The quiet after lasted about 4 seconds before Yang said, "Okay, so we just argued with the actual gods of Remnant and they left." "Yes," Izuku said. "And won." "Kind of. We kind of won. Ongoing negotiation might be a better frame. I'll take it." Yang exhaled a breath that had clearly been held for a while. Then she looked at him and her expression shifted into something warm and direct and unambiguous. "We need to talk. We've been talking for weeks. Different kind of talking." She stepped forward, closing the gap between them with the same directness she brought to everything, combat, arguments, affection. She put her hand on his jaw and tilted his face toward hers. "You went toe-to-toe with literal gods. You built a civilization in 2 weeks. You convinced Salem to stand next to you like your allies." Her thumb traced his cheekbone. "You're the most remarkable person I've ever met and I've been trying to find a reason to think that wasn't true and I've run out of reasons." "Yang," he started. "If you tell me you're complicated or the timing's wrong or any other reasonable objection, I will throw you into a wall and the wall will not win." She was grinning, fully Yang, no hedging. "I'm telling you what I want. That's it. No conditions." He looked at her. Young Xiaolong, who was fire and directness and a big heart behind the tough exterior and who had sat with him on a gym mat at 4 in the morning and shared real things without demanding anything in return. "Okay," he said. She kissed him first. Yang's version of a kiss was exactly what he'd expected, bold, warm, completely committed, leaving no ambiguity about intent. He kissed back and she made a satisfied sound against his mouth and somewhere to his left RWBY made a sound that was simultaneously happy and exasperated and the combination of the two was so characteristically RWBY that he laughed into the kiss. "Okay," Yang said, when she stepped back, slightly less composed than usual and clearly fine with that. "Good talk." "Very efficient," Weiss said, dry as the stone under their feet. "Thanks, Ice Queen." "Don't call me Ice Queen." "Yang." The night opened up after that, not into crisis, not into threat, but into the ordinary warmth of a community that had come through something together and was now on the other side of it. People moved back inside New Haven, voices returning to normal volume, the Grimm patrols resuming their rotations, the dust crystals inside steadying back to their amber warmth. Izuku stood on the borderland for a while longer, feeling the territory that was New Haven, every person, every Grimm, every structure being built in the darkness of the caves and the open air of the borderland. The network of it, all connected through his awareness, all real and particular and chosen. Salem stood near him, not speaking. Chip had returned to Izuku's shoulder and was chirping very quietly. "Are you all right?" Izuku asked her. "I don't know yet," she said. "I've been carrying that weight for 4,000 years. I'm not certain what it feels like without it." She looked at her hands, the pale skin, the dark veins. "It's still there." "But," he said, "the conditions. The disconnection. Will you be able to? I don't know." A pause. "I've forgotten how to not be alone. I'm not certain I'll be good at it. Nobody's good at it immediately. I've had 4,000 years to get worse at it." "Fair point. We'll figure it out." She looked at him. "You say that a great deal." "We'll figure it out." "Yes. Because it's usually true." Salem was quiet for a moment. "I destroyed civilizations. I sent the Grimm against innocence. I have been the cause of, the scale of what I've," she stopped. Her expression was not asking for absolution. She knew better than to ask for that. "I'm telling you so you know what you're choosing to extend your hand to." "I know," Izuku said. "I've known since Beacon." He met her ancient eyes. "I'm not forgiving what you've done. You don't get that from me, that's not mine to give. The people who were hurt by it are the only ones who can do that, and many of them aren't here anymore." He paused. "But I can choose what you do next. Or rather, you can. And I can be someone who helps you choose well. That's different from forgiveness." Salem looked at him for a long time. "You should have been born here," she said quietly. "Remnant needed you 4,000 years ago. I would have been terrible 4,000 years ago. I needed to be who I am first." Her expression shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile but occupied the same space. "Who taught you that?" "A man who gave me everything he had because he believed I could do something with it." Izuku looked at the broken moon. "I think about him every day. Do you still want to go home?" The question landed softly. He let it sit for a moment. "I used to want it like a constant ache," he said. "Every morning, the first thing I'd feel. Now it's," he looked back at New Haven. At the light inside, the Grimm patrols, the people he could hear and feel through the connections that had built over weeks. "I miss my world. I miss All Might and my classmates and my mom," his voice went rough briefly. "I miss my mom. But home is, I think home isn't a place you go back to. It's a thing you build. And I'm building it." "New Haven," Salem said. "New Haven." She stood with him a while longer, and for the first time in 4,000 years the silence around her wasn't the silence of someone who'd driven away everything that could fill it. It was just silence. Normal silence. The kind that sits comfortably between two people who are in the same place because they chose to be. Chip chirped. "Yes," Izuku told the bird. "I know. Bedtime." He went inside. Salem remained on the borderland a moment longer, feeling the changes in her own structure that the God of Light had barely alluded to, testing the edges of what had shifted, finding things not yet comprehensible. Then she walked into New Haven for the first time, through the cave entrance, into the amber-lit common space. A child was asleep on a mat in the corner. A Beowulf lay curled beside her, enormous and bone-plated and warm, and the child's hand was fisted in the Grimm's fur with the absolute trust of someone who'd never been taught to be afraid. Salem stood very still and looked at them. Glinda found her there 10 minutes later. The professor looked at Salem with the measured assessment of someone who had spent 11 years learning exactly what was and wasn't safe. "You're staying," Glinda said. Yes. Then there's a free chamber in the east tunnel. It's smaller than you're probably accustomed to. Salem blinked. "You're making practical arrangements. Izuku built something that doesn't turn people away. I'm extending that." Glinda met her eyes. "Don't make me regret it. I've been told something similar today. Smart people around here." Glinda turned and walked toward the east tunnel. After a moment, Salem followed. In the main chamber, Blake sat against a cave wall with a book open on her knees and her cat ears relaxed, tracking the room with the peripheral attention of someone who'd learned that constant vigilance was exhausting and selective attention was better. Seven lay across her feet, radiating warmth she pretended not to notice but hadn't moved away from for an hour. Pyrrha was across the room, talking to one of the Faunus children, explaining something about weapon balance, demonstrating with Milo, patient and unhurried in a way she never got to be when she was performing being Pyrrha Nikos. The girl was watching with wide eyes and her own small wooden training weapon raised in imitation. Pyrrha caught Izuku's eye across the room and smiled. Not the tournament smile. The real one. He smiled back. Winter was at the planning table, establishing the written protocol for the Grimm border patrol that she'd promised, Seven's empty spot beside her already covered in neat handwritten notes. She looked up when Izuku walked past and gave him a look that communicated several things at once without requiring words. "The protocol will be ready by morning," she said. "Take your time." "I won't." "I said by morning." "Right. Of course." Her ears were still slightly pink. She looked back at her notes. RWBY appeared from the living quarters tunnel, crescent rose folded on her back, a cup of something warm in each hand. She gave one to Izuku without being asked. She'd noticed he drank the same thing she did, and she'd been making 2 cups instead of 1 for 2 weeks, and neither of them had commented on it because commenting wasn't necessary. He wrapped both hands around the warm cup and looked around the main chamber, the amber light, the people, the Grimm, the stone being slowly shaped into something livable by beings that had been made to destroy and were choosing differently. "You're muttering," RWBY said, standing next to him. "I'm not, I wasn't. You were doing the almost muttering. The pre-mutter. There's no such thing. There absolutely is. You get this look." She demonstrated, eyes slightly unfocused, lips barely moving, head tilted. It was accurate enough to be embarrassing. "I don't look like that." "You look exactly like that. What were you thinking?" Izuku looked around the room again. "That this is what All Might would have wanted me to build," he said. "Not a copy of what he built. Something new. Something mine." He looked at the cup in his hands. "He said once that he passed on his power because he believed I could do things he couldn't. I never fully understood what he meant until now." RWBY bumped her shoulder against his. "He sounds like someone worth living up to." "Yeah. Yeah, he does." Weiss arrived at the table with more maps, immediately beginning to arrange them in the organized chaos that was her planning process. Blake set her book down and joined her. Yang was somewhere in the training area. He could hear the sounds of someone hitting something enthusiastically. Chip flew overhead from somewhere near the ceiling, did a lap of the main chamber, and landed on the planning table directly in the center of Weiss's most important map. Weiss stared at the bird. Chip stared back. "Move," Weiss said. Chip chirped. "I am a Schnee. I was the top student at Atlas Prep. I have defeated Nevermorse with a 3-point elemental combination strike. Move." Chip settled more firmly onto the map. Blake covered her mouth. RWBY's shoulders were shaking. Izuku gently removed Chip from the map and put him on his own shoulder, and Weiss smoothed the map with the dignity of someone who absolutely had not been outstared by a Grimm the size of a large sparrow. "I'm making a protocol," Weiss announced. "A bird protocol. First thing tomorrow." Winter's making a border patrol protocol, RWBY said. They can compare notes. They will not compare notes, they will each have their own, fine. They'll compare notes. Weiss picked up a pen. This is a functional civilization. We have protocol. Izuku sat down. Around him, the common space filled with the ordinary chaos of people who were figuring out how to live alongside each other, arguments about planning and training schedules and who ate the last of the good supplies and whether 7 should be allowed in the living quarters. Grimm moving through with their particular purposive quietness, pausing occasionally when someone reached out to them, pressing into the contact with the tentative warmth of beings that were still learning what warmth was. Salem would come back. Izuku was certain of that. And when she came back, the work of building something with her would be slow and complicated and full of steps in the wrong direction, but that was what building was. It was never clean. Ironwood would try again. He hadn't given up, that wasn't in his character, and the next approach would be different, smarter, more targeted. Izuku filed that in the ongoing threat portion of his thinking and moved on. The gods were watching. They'd set ongoing observation without intervention, and he believed them, the god of darkness genuinely, the god of light provisionally. Ongoing wasn't permanent, and the conversation that had happened on the borderland would need to continue happening, in different ways, as New Haven grew and proved or disproved what Izuku had argued. That was fine. He knew how to demonstrate by doing. He had people around him who were there because they chose to be, not because he'd commanded them, not because he'd manipulated them, not because they had nowhere else to go. They were here because they believed in what was being built and in the person building it, and that was a kind of trust that was different from anything One for All had given him. Different from anything the Grimm essence gave him. It was the kind of trust that happened between people who'd shown each other their real selves. He looked at RWBY, arguing good-naturedly with Weiss about the map. At Yang's voice carrying from the training area, something about a Grimm sparring partner that sounded like a very young story. At Blake reading again, one hand absently on Seven's head. At Pyrrha demonstrating weapon grip with careful patience. At Winter making her protocol with the focus of someone who finally had a structure worth protecting. At Glinda somewhere in the East Tunnel, doing something he suspected would turn out to be essential. At Chip, perched on his shoulder, chirping very softly at nothing in particular. "Hey, Izuku," RWBY said, turning to look at him. "What are you thinking?" He thought about All Might, who'd given him everything and believed he could do something new with it. He thought about his mom, who'd cried when he got his quirk and cried harder when he left for UA and who would have no idea where he was right now, and that hurt in a way that didn't stop but could be held. He thought about the pools and the darkness and the screaming transformation that had taken one person out and made something unprecedented from the material. He thought about the Grimm, incomplete and purposeless for 4,000 years, finding out what it felt like to matter. He thought about Salem on the borderland, testing the edges of a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it wasn't the same as existence. He thought about the god of darkness saying interesting, that, and meaning something older than pride. "I'm thinking," Izuku said, "that I need to improve the eastern water channel routing before the winter season. The current gradient isn't, oh my god," Weiss said. "He's talking about infrastructure," Blake said, turning a page. "We're in the aftermath of a divine confrontation and he's talking about water channels." "The water channel is important, Izuku," RWBY said, and she was grinning, the full one, the gut-deep one that he'd been collecting. "Shut up about the water channel. The gradient is, shut up." He shut up. He was smiling. He couldn't help it, it came up from somewhere real and whole and without condition, and Chip chirped on his shoulder, and New Haven hummed around him with the sound of people building something that mattered. Outside, on the borderland, the broken moon poured its light onto new stone, and the Grimm that had been made to destroy moved through the night on patrol, purposive and calm and something that had no name yet in any language on Remnant. Something new. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.